Okay, welcome back. This is tape 2. In case you've gotten lost, we're on tape 2. This will be the third side in the series. Right now we're up to March 18th, 1975, and it's Billy's 8th contact with Semjase from the star cluster known as the Pleiades. The interesting topic that happened in that particular meeting, Billy had some questions that he was getting now from his group members. When he would go out for a contact, he would, of course, come back and tell everybody about what happened, and they would discuss the information because, excuse me, they were all starting to take part in actually helping him get the information together. Billy would type it out very roughly, and then they would clean it up. So already they were forming kind of like a work group to help him out. And along with that, of course, they had a lot of questions of their own. And since they weren't able to go on the contacts with Billy, quite frequently they would give questions to Billy to have him ask Semjase. And she would try to entertain the questions whenever possible. And this brought up a pretty good group of questions on this occasion. And the first one is, Billy jumped right off and says, "What is matter?" Well, she says, matter is a sizable idea. It is a solid form of energy that can be sizable. What she's referring to here is this, that throughout the universe, energy and matter are everywhere, and that you can take energy and you can convert it to matter, and depending on how much you can convert, you could convert it to any sizable amount of matter. All energies can be turned into solid matter. It's only necessary to condense the concerning energy very strongly and concentrate it very highly. Now, of course, they say it's very simple. The process by which you actually do that might be a little difficult, but we do that to some extent already. We convert ethers, gases, and so forth into different things now, and make certain compounds and metals and so forth. So we're working on it. What we do is, once you concentrate a certain energy, you can convert it into a solid matter, and this provides the basic building blocks of solid components. You create the neutron, the proton, and the electron. This forms the atoms of the chemical compounds, which then in their three aggregate forms form the solid outer wrap. And this is something that our scientists, I'm sure, are quite aware of by now. This means that the original energy is absolute matter, and original matter is absolute energy. General idea is that the entire universe is either matter or energy. It's either solid or it's non-solid. Coarse matter is what matter is. Solid matter is what the Pleiadians refer to as coarse matter. Okay? Energy is what they refer to as fine matter. Earlier we talked a little bit about, our spirits, when they leave the body, they go into the fine matter world. Well, the fine matter world is an energy form world. It's not a solid matter or a coarse matter world. Okay? She mentioned that it's possible to create machines which actually convert matter to energy and vice versa. And apparently they understand that concept quite well. A side effect or an outdrawing of that might be the fact that they were able to take Billy into the ship, much like we see on Star Trek, where they would beam him up, somehow where the particles of his body would come apart, be arranged back inside of the ship. So they're having control of converting the solid matter of a person into fine matter and then putting it back into coarse matter. This also is one of the main ways that they actually move their ships around the galaxy, which we'll talk a little bit more about pretty soon. The most natural form of what we're talking about here, converting energy into matter, is done by the creation itself. And here again we find the Pleiadians bringing up this idea of what the creation is. They openly admitted to Billy that they didn't know everything about creation, but through their technology and their association with other races, they were learning a lot more about the actual creative energy that creates the universe and everything in it. So when they refer to the creation, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about the original source of energy that created all things in the universe. Commonly on our planet, we generally refer this to as a god, but they're saying that gods are actually physical forms that are created in the universe by creation, just like everyone else. That gods are actually humans that have on the very highest development of knowledge, and that their knowledge of the elements and the laws of nature and the laws of creation are so high that it seems to us that they are creating things, when mostly they're just manipulating or generating things because of no knowledge. That the real force, the real creative force in the universe is what they're calling a creation. They have discovered that creation naturally on its own creates an idea of spiritual energy. And this is what they believe. They say that the creational force that started this universe, and we'll go much farther, more into depth in this on the tape series at the end, is that the creation has the idea of spiritual energy. The spiritual energy then is converted into different forms of matter, which begin to evolve, and everything throughout the universe then has logical reasoning to it. And the rocks, the planets, the animals, us, everything that is solid, which is coarse matter, has natural logic to it, and is part of the mapping, you might say, or the knowledge of the creational energy. So, since everything in the universe is coarse matter, and or it is fine matter, they can be converted easily back and forth once the knowledge is known. So, that was her general explanation of what matter actually was. In relationship to his second question, which was, what about the theory of relativity, and especially the dilation of time, because somebody in the group, of course, was familiar with Einstein's theory, E equals mc squared, which stands for energy equals mass times the speed of light square. They were curious as to what Semjase would say about that, and if there was truth to it, if it was really a valid theory. Well, she says, well, in relationship to actually moving in space and space travel, there are many different ways to overcome space. As a matter of fact, there was way too many for her to expand upon, but she says the one main thing, no matter which method you actually use, you must learn to master what they call hyperspace. Because in hyperspace, this is where a time dilation is caused by the process of moving into hyperspace. She says this is where the theory of relativity is wrong, where it becomes just a theory. Okay? The turning off of a time dilation or time shift is caused by the breaking open of hyperspace. Well, how do you break into hyperspace? Well, here's a little short explanation that can go along with Exhibit 1 on your drawings there of the beam ship. We mentioned earlier that a beam ship can take off, leave Earth, move up to tremendous speeds. It makes a jump, and then it jumps to the Pleiades, returns in the physical form, and slows down. It takes 7 hours. The 7 hours are spent speeding up, slowing down, and the jump is almost instantaneous. Well, the jump is very, very fast. She says what actually happens is when that ship speeds up, it's protected by an energy field around it, because as you move any matter in space, as it begins to move, there is actually mass in space. It's like if you have a boat in water. The faster you go, you feel the force against you, right? Even when you're swimming. Well, in space, which we think of as a vacuum, it actually is not. There is mass in space. And when you speed an object up to 50,000 miles an hour, 100,000 miles an hour, 1,000,000 miles an hour, speed of light is approaching 700 and some million miles an hour, something like that. You're moving at incredible speeds. There is a mass buildup. And that mass will attempt to actually cause the explosion of your craft that you're in, because the mass will keep building. So what they do is they've learned to put energy screens around the ship that protect it from this mass speed correlation. And at the certain point when they get up around the speed of light or beyond it, they can accelerate way beyond it if they want to, they use this tremendous force to facilitate what they call the paralyzation. They turn off the protection screens around it. At that moment, there's a tremendous increase in the velocity of the ship as it bursts forward, and at that exact time, there's a tremendous enlarging of the mass, then, of that energy screen as it's coming in. They use that to facilitate some sort of compression concept, where the ship is then converted to fine matter, and it's a type of fine matter that can exist in hyperspace. So that's exactly what they do. She says that it happens very quickly, the matter gets distorted, and with a millionth of a second, it becomes fine matter, and it's able to pass through hyperspace. Speed is not the only consideration in this. She says you can go way beyond the speed of light and still do it. This is generally you need to get up approximately at least to the speed of light before there is enough mass generated where this is actually facilitated. It's the mass of an object increases in relation to the growth of its speed. It even happens in airplanes, dust, when we're traveling. Space travel can be very, very dangerous. As we move forward in our technology, right now we're blowing rockets out into space at 40,000 miles an hour, which is very slow on the scale of things that move throughout the universe. The speed of light is 186,000 miles in 1 second, and we're only going 30,000 miles in an hour. So in an hour's time, light travels a tremendous difference. If it goes 186,000 miles in 1 second, now it takes 60 seconds to make a minute, and then it takes 60 minutes to make an hour. So you're talking a very large distance that this thing will actually speed of light in 1 hour. So it's tremendously faster than 30,000 miles an hour. It's a very difficult concept, she said, to understand hyperspace and time dilation. Because you're moving, when you are in hyperspace, when we break into hyperspace and make this time dilation, you're in what's called null time. It is a non-physical, non-three-dimensional world then where only fine matter exists. One of the real difficulties here is that if there is the slightest variance in the speed of the fine matter particles, there can be a tremendous shift in time. As a matter of fact, they mentioned that just a very slight change in that speed, you could slip millions of years in time and to get totally lost and not be able to find your way back to where you came from. She says there are stories all the time of developing races trying to figure this technology out, and they work on it, and there's a tremendous loss of life and equipment because it's such a difficult thing to actually figure out. She says even here on Earth, we've had any number of space travelers who have come here in a variety of sort of time-type machines and gotten stuck, and they can't get away. If a spaceship breaks through the speed of light without going into hyperspace and without protection of these screens, these manufactured screens, there will be a catastrophe for the ship and the crew. A time dilation is only just one of the many dangers that happen, so something we have to look forward to as we get out there. Just to kind of finish up on this note, it may start becoming aware to some of us that even when we move here in our high-speed jets, there's an increase in mass. You're in a common airliner, maybe going 600 miles an hour. You actually are increasing in mass somewhat because of your speed. Now, just to fly in a normal airplane, that's a pretty low speed on the scale of things, so you don't really have to worry too much about any damage to yourself. But if that was done repeatedly, and if you were, for instance, in rockets going 30, 40,000 miles an hour, if you were, on a shuttlecraft going back and forth to the moon all the time at those speeds, eventually it would come into play. She says at the very slow speeds, like in an airplane, it could take hundreds of years for that damage to really, build up. But at the faster speeds, like in the rockets, it could happen maybe within a few years. So what's really happening is as you speed up, mass of your body is actually increasing, and that can have a damaging effect on your mental functions and on the actual functioning apparatus of the brain. So it could cause untold sort of mental damage. Might point out here again that Billy Meyer lives on a small farm in a place called Schmidrudi, Switzerland, and because of his loss of his left arm, is very limited in the type of work he can do. And for the past many years, especially during the time of the contacts, most all of his attention has been focused on just amassing the information from the contacts and getting his books out. Because of that, he really has no other income. He gets a small pension amounting to roughly $600 a month in American to live by. And the expenses on the farm are quite high, so the group members all contribute to do that. Well, during these early contacts, Semiosi was always suggesting to Billy that, I'd get the books out, and Billy was always having trouble just paying the rent. So he mentioned to her on a few occasions that, that he had money problems, and she mentioned that she would supply him with crystals and other stones and so forth that he could sell. Well, to begin with, Billy says, I'm not materialistic, I don't want to sell things for money, and then he says that there's a problem with the officials in Switzerland, and he wasn't too sure if that was a good idea. But she, on several occasions, offered and even suggested that they would bring him crystals from different worlds and other stones, precious stones that he could sell, and that there really wouldn't be any problem with officials because there is no difference in the stones, for instance, a crystal from one world over the ones we would find here. That throughout the universe there is logic as to the structure and components of the things that make up a crystal or a stone or whatever. So the idea was that a crystal on another world is just like a crystal here, and gold on another planet is just like the gold here, that the structure is pretty much the same. So she wasn't worried about them being able to detect that these stones were from another planet or something like that. Billy could just sell them as regular stones. But, however, he did receive a few crystals from him, but this led to some questions about, do certain precious stones, crystals, metals, and so forth have some sort of healing capabilities? And she said, well, yes, but it's overplayed, that many stones, such as crystals, have the ability to absorb some types of illnesses and pull them into themselves, and it can be beneficial, where you can store healing energies and so forth in stones. But this was not to be exaggerated, and they really weren't that effective. She even commented to Billy that it's important that you know how to clean stones, because someone can be wearing a crystal for a period of time, and if they're suffering through some sort of illnesses, either physical, mental, emotional, or whatever, that also can get into the stone, and these stones need to be clear out. So she went through a brief description explaining to Billy how to clean them out and so forth using a pyramid. At the same time, she mentioned to Billy that their technology, of course, is farther advanced than ours, and she gave Billy the designs and plans on how he could build a machine that would cure most illnesses. And she expressed in some detailed explanation how this would go about. It was so clear that Billy even estimated the cost of being around 30,000 Swiss francs to build this machine. I've always wanted to know what the machine was and get the plans. And when I was visiting at Billy's, I asked about this. I says, was the machine ever built? And they told me no. And I says, would it be possible to get these plans? And I was sharply told there that the machine was only for Billy, which is very contradictory to what it says in the contact notes. So as of yet, I still have never seen the plans for this machine, nor do I know really very much about it. But apparently they do exist, and they are blocked out of the contact notes. It just they put some dotted lines in there where she's explaining how this machine works, so we really don't have a clue. But it could be very interesting someday if we could get that information. And here is some actual off-world technology that could be beneficial to man, but it's being held back over there. Billy, on several occasions, was always asking Semjase if it would be possible for some of the members of his family and his group to come out and actually see the ships. And most of the time, Semjase was always rather emphatic that no, that wouldn't be possible, that they had decided, that the Pleiadians had decided that only Billy would be able to see the ship. They seemed to somehow be able to control matter and energy, and through some sort of distortion system, they call it, they can cause certain people not to see it. For instance, Billy could be standing on the road taking a picture of the ship, and you could be just like 100 meters down the road or 100 yards down the road, and you wouldn't be able to see it. So apparently they can control reflected light. They can control somehow, how the image bounces off the ship. I have really no idea how they do it, but that is a possibility. I know that several people over in Billy's group who I've talked to that have taken him out on contacts experienced that same frustration. But on one occasion they did say, that they would allow that, and they allowed Billy to bring several members of the family out for a night demonstration where they were all able to bring their cameras and take pictures of the several ships at night, which they did, and there are some very good pictures there. On that particular occasion, Semjase was even very clear to Billy that it would be possible at this point for him to invite outside people, like members of the press, members of other investigative bodies, to come and witness the demonstration. And they told Billy to be very careful about who he invited, that they didn't want to bring really negative people out who would try to make this out as something, contrary or negative. That if there were, people in the media who would report this honestly and clearly, and then they were welcome to invite them. But Billy was to be very careful about who he invited. To my knowledge, he invited certain family members and other friends and witnesses, and a lot of pictures were taken, but I don't know of anybody in the press that was actually invited. During the ending of this contact, Semjase said that she wished to finish some of the history lesson that she had started once before, and so I want to continue that right here and tell you a little bit more about the history of our ancestors and bring it right up to today. Before, when we talked about history, we discussed the fact that the ancient Lyrians had spread themselves throughout the galaxy, seeded many other planets, and spread around, including under the leadership of an Ishwish named Aesol, had moved off and formed what we today think of as the Pleiadian society. That was 230,000 years back. And then down through the centuries, on many occasions, Earth had been populated with small colonies. As a matter of fact, there have been many people from the Pleiades, Lyra, Vega, and Orion on many different occasions who had come here and settled small colonies from time to time. The first really major mass colonization that they are familiar with occurred 50,000 years back when an Ishwish named Pelagon came here and brought around 70,000 people with him. Among those 70,000 people, there were 200 sub-leaders and scientists, each one a specialist in a certain area of scientific information. They built a very large society. That society covered the entire planet. It was on every continent. There were cities everywhere. That civilization lasted for almost 10,000 years before it ended in a very violent war. Fortunately for them, they had the technology to get off the planet, and most of them fled, the ones that could survive anyway. For 7,000 years, then, there's a period where the Earth is almost totally alone, where there's nothing going on. Now we're back to 40,000 years ago. They fled and had their war. There's 7,000 years of almost no one being here except the then developing Earth human beings, the Adams and the Evas, that's us. And 33,000 years back then, the descendants of those who had fled that big war, many of them returned. In particular, there was a great leader named Atlant, and he had a wife named Caratide, and they founded the continent that would be called Atlantis. Caratide's father's name was Muras, M-U-R-A-S, and through him they founded a city called Mu, which was located, the central city, in the Gobi Desert. The city of Mu had two underground cities, Agharta I and Agharta II, which had tunnels built between them, and that was the central seat of power for Mu. Mu and Atlantis both had their own colonizations all over the planet and sprung up all over the place. But they lived peacefully for many thousands of years, actually about 18,000 years. And then about that time, certain factions grew up in both of their societies, which were beginning to cause problems and causing one person against another. And after all these years of peace, strife broke out. There were some factions of war beginning. The governments at hand, the Atlantean and the Mu governments, would not stand for this war breaking out, and those who were attempting to cause the wars, they drove them out of town, literally. But in this case, they drove them off the planet. Well, these people left in large amounts. There was an exodus of those warlike people. They left, and I'm told they went to the Barnard Star. Some of the others may have split off and gone to different areas, but that's where the major amount of them went. 2,000 years went by where there was again peace between Atlantis and Mu and the cities of Earth. We're back to about 13,000 years now, back from our time. That's the time frame where we're at. At that point, those people who had left had built up on their own planet, the ones that were exiled. Their race had escalated and become very ruthless and very warlike. They then had a leader named Arus, A-R-U-S. They decided to return to Earth. Arus must have been quite a guy, because it says in their folklore that he was thought of as the barbarous one. He also had a strong following, had a couple hundred leaders behind him, similar to Pelagon, that were very high in the sciences and the arts. They settled in the high north country, it says, and in the area we now call Florida. In these two areas, and proceeded to start small wars again against Atlantis and Mu. One interesting fact, though, if you take the globe of Earth and look at it, and look where Florida is now. Now, if you take your hands and roll it over to where Florida moves up to the north, where Greenland is now, that's the position that the planet was in at that time. So just roll the planet over so Florida moves up farther north and up to that northern area where Greenland now is, and that's the position where things were actually at. That puts the area where Atlantis was, which was the large landmass between South America and Africa, that moves it up farther north, where it's north of the equator then. Okay, more on the line almost with where America is now. So you can see that the planet was in a different position. What happened was, war finally eventually did break out, that Eris and his people caused a great war to break out. There was a major war that happened between Atlantis and Mu. And that ended actually in one day. It was such a short war. They had such high technology. Just to give you a brief idea of what happened, on the history tapes that I have, this goes into much larger detail, and there's a much longer explanation all about the history and these things, but I don't have time for here. So you could listen to that if you're interested in more. But ultimately what happened was the Atlanteans, who had a large number of ships, a very large army of spacers, started an assault against Mu in the morning, and apparently within about 20 minutes' time, with these some sort of dissolving ray energy beams they have, they almost immediately annihilated the city of Mu. Now, the people of Mu were thought of as scientifically being more advanced than Atlanteans, but they didn't have the number of spacers, and apparently they really weren't prepared for the immediate attack. The Atlanteans caught them by surprise and wiped Mu out almost instantly, like I say, within about 20 minutes' time. Unknown to the people of Atlantis, as they were back celebrating and cheering their immediate victory, they had just wiped out millions of their friends. The people of Mu, the scientists of Mu, who had been expecting a war, had taken a large group of their people, flown out into space in the area where the asteroid belt is, and found rather large chunks of the old planet Milana, which is what the debris of the asteroid belt is made up out of. They took one very large asteroid that was floating out there that was several miles in diameter, and they actually, by hooking some sort of engines or ships to that asteroid, propelled it towards Earth. They then propelled this large asteroid and smashed it right into Atlantis. When it hit, it actually didn't hit Atlantis. It exploded when it hit the atmosphere several miles above the land. But when it exploded, it ignited and blew up the atmosphere. It caused the ocean floor to crack open, and that's why Atlantis sunk down to the ocean floor. The air, the atmosphere of Earth was just black smoke and ruin for, I think, something like 40 years. It threw us off our axis and caused the rotation of the planet to actually change. So it was a rather disastrous war and wiped out just about everything. There was hardly any life left on the planet. Eris and his people survived. Most of the people who survived from Atlantis and Mu from the different cities fled to get away from the wars and the evil tyranny of Eris and took off back to the Pleiades, Vega, Barnard Star, or other friendly places. When the dust had settled, so to speak, Eris, an Ishwish who has an expected life expectancy of over 3,000 years, was still alive, along with all of his followers. They had taken Earth. Well, there weren't too many people, though, to rule over. There was the then developing Earth human beings that were left here, and just the people that had followed Eris, and hardly anybody left from Atlantis and Mu, because the destruction was so wide-felt. Well, after a period of time, the sub-leaders of Eris, the scientists, began experimenting on the local Earth human beings, the Adams and the Evas. Through that experimentation, all sorts of diabolical creatures were created that have gone down through the years as myths. They bred humans with fish and all sorts of animals to try to do things. But among these rather diabolical experiments, some were conducted by a scientist, one of the Eris' scientists, named Semyas A, with an A. In the Lyrian and Pleiadian language, if you end the name with A, it's masculine. If you end it with E, it's feminine. Billy's having contacts with Semyas E, and Semyas A would be a man. Actually, the names, these are kind of like code names that they use, and they are, I guess you could call them spirit names. And they use these names to, one, express the level of education that the individual is currently in. And Semyas A or Semyas E is a spirit name that indicates that a person is more like a half Ishwish, that they've learned about half the knowledge that would be necessary to be a king or a queen of wisdom. That's the general idea. So that's what the name actually meant. So here in Eris' time, we have a scientist named Semyasa that began conducting experiments again on the Earth humans, the Adams. And this is where Adam and Eve actually came from these experiments, that he took a local Earth human woman and coupled her together in some sort of lab experiment and created Adam. That's where Adam actually came from. He then did the breeding again and created a young lady. Okay. Now he had in the lab creation, an Adam and an Eve, a man and a woman. And when they grew up, he coupled them together, and that was the formation, or where the story of Adam and Eve actually started from. That's how it actually happened. And that was the beginning of the current race of people here on Earth, that they had been genetically altered through Adam and Eve, and that's how it really got started. You see, after this big destruction and all this war, there weren't very many people really left on the planet. We only really had about 3 tribes left. There was the Indian tribe that we think of here in the Americas. There was the inhabitants around the Black Sea, and there was the race called the Hebrews or the Gypsies at the time. That's about all the people that were left. We had the Sumerian race, which was hiding out over in India, up in the mountains and so forth over there, but those were ETs, and they weren't considered among the developing Earth human races. So we have three developing Earth human races which have genetically been started by Semyasa, this scientist from Eris. Eris is very upset that this is happening when he finds out, because frankly, he just didn't want his people mixed with the lower forms, the Earth people. And at first he was outraged. It's not known exactly what he did to Semyasa, but the many other scientists that were also experimenting with Earth people, many of them were killed or exiled or whatever. And apparently he was quite enraged until he discovered that now he had a whole new group of followers, that he not only had reign over his people, but he could also had more followers in the form of three groups of Earth people who were developing in these three areas around the planet. So to them, he set himself up as God, the creation, and they became to worship him. He thought so little of them that he demanded sacrifices from them. He was very cruel to them, quite often demonstrated to keep him in line by killing some of them. Now remember, Eris was an Ishwish, a very, very, very powerful man who understood much of the laws of nature. To him, things like telepathy, levitation, and most importantly, the ability to put thoughts in another person's mind was something that he understood. So that would be very scary to developing Earth people who had abilities nothing like this. Even on our level of knowledge today, someone like that would be very scary indeed. Well, Eris eventually died. He had a son named Jehav, Jehav, who was just as ruthless as he was and continued his reign of domination and fear, hate, and anger all over the planet. So the planet Earth was not in very good shape. We're going back now, we're about 9,000 years back when Jehav comes into power. Jehav has another son, Jehovah. Jehovah is the one who continued that tradition and actually helped pull all the Hebrews together and told them that they were his chosen people among all the other people on the planet, and instilled this thought of speciality into the Hebrew people through his ability mentally to do that. And this is where the concept started to the people that they were chosen over the other people of the planet. Well, perhaps they were, but at that time I don't think that was any great prize, considering the level of evolution and intelligence that was going on at the planet at that time. I don't think that was much of a prize. But at any rate, that's where the concept started. There were two or three other leaders after that who were not as vicious, who were not as bloodthirsty as Jehovah, who eventually wanted to return to the Pleiades. Life in the Pleiades had become very peaceful, very comfortable, and very loving. And life on Earth was very distasteful to these older, more evolved beings over a period of time. And eventually, they decided to leave. And it was 1943 years back from the year 1975, which puts us in the year 32, that they decided to leave Earth and return back to the Pleiades. At that time they did. That was kind of the end of the Lyrian Pleiadian leadership on the planet Earth. And for a long period of time, they just did nothing more than just occasionally watch in on us. It wasn't until around the 1600s that the current race of Pleiadians took an interest in us again, because we were starting to develop rapidly. And they began to build bases here on the planet again and actually monitor our civilization and take an interest in it. On several occasions, they had open contacts with other people like Billy Meyer, and leading up to 1937, when they again decided, because of the acceleration time that we're moving into, this Waterman era, that they again would procreate several spirits, and they did procreate 4. Procreation means to cause them to be born. And on February 3rd, 1937, at 11:20 in the morning, once again, the Pleiadians intermingled, you might say, into the society of Earth, and caused Billy and 3 others to be born with a mission in mind to get themselves back involved with Earth people, pass on certain information, mostly spiritual information, to try to help us through this difficult time. You see, the Pleiadian theory is that the New Age, Waterman era, whatever you want to call it, the Golden Age, Age of Revolution, whatever you want to call us coming up, is a very important time. They understand scientifically what is actually happening and explain that to Billy. They feel it's very important during this time of potential growth and learning, that they try to bring strong people forward, light bearers, light workers, teachers, prophets, and intelligent people forward, educate them so that the earth has a chance to grow into a peaceful civilization instead of the rather warlike greed power system that currently prevails over our planet. First of all, let me make a couple of things clear, at least clear by the Pleiadians, that they wanted to make it known that the New Age time is not a time of ending. Many religions, beliefs, and different people like to think of this as the end of the world, that this is an ending time, and it's not. It is actually a time of change. It's a time of beginnings, and it's a time of wonderment. It's a chance for opportunity. They told Billy that we have roughly 800 years, they estimate. During the next 800 years will be the massive changeover with the potential to move into a new type of social structure and a new society with a new way of thinking where we would live closer in harmony to creation. If we miss that, if within the next 800 years that we instead fall into barbarism and continue with our greed, war, and power, then we most likely will annihilate ourselves, or someone will do it for us, and we would fall back into, dark times again. But let me explain a little bit more about what this means. The planet Earth is in a solar system. We're taught 9 planets, but there's actually 11, we're told, revolving around a sun. This solar system, then, that we're in is on its own path. It's in a large kind of oval pattern of its own. And every 25,860 years, our solar system, it's just a scientific fact, returns to the same spot that it's at right now. We are revolving, we're moving very slowly as a solar system. Just like our planet revolves around the sun, our entire solar system also revolves around a central sun. That central sun is very, very powerful. We're just beginning to understand that radiations, electronic waves that are emanated by other heavenly bodies, planets, stars, etc., actually do affect our thoughts. They affect nature, and they have effect on a lot of things which we really don't understand yet. But the scientific understanding of the Pleiadians is that every 25,860 years, the solar system that we live in, all of our planets and our sun, move close in proximity to this central sun. The strongest point of radiation from that central sun is just as we enter it. That's when we get kind of a boost in energy. There's a surge of power, kind of like turning up the switch on your hair dryer from high to low, and there's a sudden surge of heat, and then after you use it for a second, you kind of get used to it. Well, it's something like that. So what they want to make us aware of, that this is a great time of potential. It's a time of change. It's a time of wonderful opportunity. Along with that, the downside is that there's going to be a lot of problems, too. Anytime we have change, we have fear and a lot of other problems. You don't have to be a genius to look at our planet right now and look at our planet as a whole and see all the people around it in China and Africa and the Polynesian Islands, Australia, Asia, everywhere, that everybody is growing up with different ideas, different concepts. We are a world in turmoil. We are being thrown together through communications and technology. Some places it's going well, some places it's not going very well. But unfortunately, most people, when things aren't going well, they turn to whatever they regard as their religious beliefs. They try to put faith in what they believe. And these ideas are not going to serve them in the coming years, because these old philosophies, old thinking, old religions don't really provide answers for the coming questions that we're going to have. Consequently, there's going to be a lot of emotional hardship for many people. Murder, suicide, crime, things like this are going to be tremendously on the rise. We are going through a time of change. On February 3rd, 1844, we began 184 years of change. This is when we start to move into the proximity of this new age position, this new cycle. And at that point, things start to accelerate. We've noticed just ourselves in the last few years the great acceleration of inventions and so forth. There is no other time in the development of our society when we will accelerate as fast as we have the last 100 years and will the next 20. Look where we came from covered wagons to going to the moon in such a short space of time, where for 2,000 years before that we hardly grew anything at all. Well, we had this 92-year period from 1844 up to 1937, which was the beginning, or the first half of this changeover period. The Pleiadians say the changeover period is 184 years long. It goes from 1844 up to, let's see, that would be what, 2028. So they're saying that the first half, the things start changing, inventions and everything greatly accelerate. Since 1937, on February 3rd, that's the second half of this changing period. This 92 years is dominated now by all the problems that come up because of this accelerated change. And boy, aren't we seeing them. There's going to be a lot of wars, a lot of other emotional problems. One thing they said we can count on seeing is there will be a tremendous rise in new religions and new ideas. So apparently, and we are seeing some of that, apparently as things get more difficult, people search for answers. They search for ways to solve, their problems. And when they do this, they come upon their own conclusions. They then form together, maybe in a small group, give themselves a name, and we have a new religious sect. Well, we can expect that to happen a lot more as times get more and more difficult. One other thing of note, they mentioned that because of this change and because of the increase in radiations, that those people born on February 3rd, 1937, as close as possible to 11:20 in the morning, have the greatest possibility of being the teachers, prophets, and geniuses of our time. See, that was the optimum time, apparently, for people to come in and be affected by the radiations, just as they were at that moment. From that date forward for a year, through the whole year of 1937, beginning of February 3rd, like I said, it was the highest probability of these geniuses, prophets, and way preparers and teachers to be born. So we might look to people at that age. We're in 1992 as I'm speaking now, so those people would be, 55 years old. So we could look to, as you're looking around at people that are speaking, lecturing, and talking, you might keep an eye out for people who are roughly 55 years old right now, and let's see how many of them have really come forward. Because, of course, even though you may be a highly evolved spirit, and evolve means wisdom gained over a number of lifetimes, okay? So we may have a number of those people that were born, but they were born in poor environments, or for whatever reason they weren't able to really come through. So it's also interesting that that's when Billy was born, right at that moment, why they caused him to be born at that time. And they seem to have very high respect for Billy's evolution. Billy is not Pleiadian. He is not Lyrian. He's from an unusual little race called Lawsons. Apparently they live on only one planet, are very, very old, older than the Pleiadians themselves, and consequently are very good beings for becoming prophets because of the age of their evolution, they can withstand and understand things very well. Also, I think it has something to do with the brain matter itself being able to grow larger numbers of connectors, which can hold more acids and consequently more intelligence. So there seems to be something to that. That's probably why they altered Billy's thoughts when he was 7. There's probably a strong connection there someplace. So anyway, they wanted us to be aware that scientifically it's just a fact that our solar system is moving into this new period, that we're in new geography. We're getting closer to the central sun. The radiations from the sun have a really strong effect on our thinking and so forth here. Consequently, this new age period, which is here, is a very good time for potential. It's potentially a great time for us to grow. But this means those of us who move more towards a spiritual life, seeking out the answers of creation, learning to develop our world and our society around spiritual laws, have a much better chance now because of this location where we're at. We have a better chance of being heard, being understood, and developing ourselves. So it's important, if you feel the need to be somehow involved, to be inspiring, to be a role model for others. And I think inspiration is the word here for the next few years, that it's not a good time probably to go out with a gun, pick up a gun and shoot the bad guys. It's not a good time to go out and fight in direct opposition to the negative influences on the planet. Instead, it's a time to turn away from that and let the negative things spin out on their own, fight among themselves. It's a good time to do some woodshedding for yourself, to become a spiritual person yourself, to rise spiritually within yourself to your capabilities. Work on, development of self. And by that, you will become a role model and an inspiration to others. And most importantly, as you're doing this, as you're developing yourself spiritually, make sure there's integrity with it. Don't do it, and don't let your ego get involved. Catch yourself if you find yourself, becoming ego-minded, wanting to be popular, needing to be successful to write a book, or you want to do a television show. In other words, don't make things up. Because true spiritual development part of that is the development of integrity to self. You will not be a good role model, nor a successful inspiration to others if what you're doing is not filled with integrity. I think integrity is probably the main thing that we look for in our leaders and our role models, and sadly enough, it's one of the main things that's missing right now among our leaders that we normally see in today's world. Our presidents, our leaders, our generals and so forth, even though they think they're doing the right thing, that this world is terribly lacking in integrity. So keep that in mind when you're on your own path of spiritual growth here. Incidentally, the Pleiadians see a pretty good future for us. Even throughout all of the chaos and other things that are coming up, they see a rather positive future. As a matter of fact, there are a couple of ways of calculating the future. As you said, there's one way to calculate. There are two ways to see the future. You can use mechanical or spiritual means to see what's called a future vision. You can look ahead into the future, and that's fairly accurate. Or you can also use numerology and numeric systems and so forth, mathematics to predict future, and that's not nearly as accurate. They have looked ahead in future view and seen a rather pleasing future for us that we actually, based on events in 1975, they showed Billy a future where we had grown peacefully to a society. He was looking 500 years ahead, that we had spacecraft very similar to the Pleiadians. We had facilities on the moon and the outer planets, and we were doing fairly well, and our population was much lower. So there is, sounds like a pretty good possibility for growth in the future. So let's see what we can all do to be part of that. Okay, I see on the old little wheel here we're we're coming to the end of this side of the tape. So I'll see you on the next side. Okay, we're back here on side 2 over here, and this is actually the 4th side of the tape series on tape 2, so I hope you're still with us. I was just getting ready to discuss a little bit about some of the problems in Billy's group. Bear in mind that Billy's a farmer, and his friends are all farmers and live in small town areas, and suddenly to find themselves in the middle of contacts from highly evolved beings from another world, obviously they got a little excited. Some of the members were having a lot of difficulty believing what was going on. Much of the information that was coming from Semjase and the other Pleiadians was very disturbing to some of the members of the group. It was very hard for them to throw off years of upbringing and things that they had been taught and suddenly change their minds to another way of thinking. I think the most disturbance was probably caused by much of the information surrounding religion and Jesus and the Talmud and so forth. But there was a lot of information brought to Billy about Jesus Christ, and all that, since there's so much of it, I put it on 2 special tapes that you can listen to in this series, and they're called the Talmud Emmanuel. And the information about Jesus came in many different parts of his experiences. He had some experiences about it when he was young, in his teens, and then on many contacts there would be little snippets of information, as well as the uncovering of the book, the Talmud Emmanuel, which was translated out of Aramaic into German. So I put all that together on 2 tapes, so it's a little bit more coherent, so you can listen to it there. But some of the members in his group were having trouble with that, and it caused problems. Billy took a picture once of several members of the group with the ship floating overhead, and Semjase was very uncomfortable that a couple of these doubters and people who were having problems was in the picture, and so she actually destroyed the pictures with her mind. And she didn't want these pictures out, and she wanted Billy to kind of remove these people from the group before they caused any problems. So already we're having difficulties with Billy and the people around him. While Billy is a very nice, warm, intelligent person who's full of integrity, he's not your leadership type. The two don't seem to go hand in hand. And throughout the whole history of his contacts in the group, he's always had difficulties with, with members. But that's to be expected. There's so much pressure on these people from inside their own ranks, from the outside world, and from these extraterrestrials that obviously there'd be a lot of difficulties springing up. They're no different than just the rest of us. So overall, though, I think they've done a wonderful job of coping with all this stress and pressure from outside influences and trying to keep this information as honest as it is and to try to get it out to the world. So, okay. Semjase also mentioned to Billy that not to be too worried about his acceptance, because Billy was being led to go out and do speeches and talks in public, and he didn't want to do that. He says, I'm not good at that. I just don't know how to talk to people in public, and he really never has. And she told him not to be too concerned, that there were a lot of good people, she called them friends, around the planet that would hear about him and be drawn to the information that could be helpful in those ways. A couple of times people from Billy's group also went out and gave talks, and I understand Billy tried it once or twice, but he was not received very well. I think it was just too difficult for someone that had had all the unusual experiences that he had had, contacting people in other worlds, seeing other worlds, traveling in other times, actually visiting, moving in time and visiting prehistoric times, medieval times, visiting Emmanuel at the time just before his crucifixion. These were all amazing things. Billy, thinking, of course, everybody would be fascinated to hear about it, comes out in public to give a small talk, and people really think he's kind of insane or crazy. Billy spent some time when he was younger in a mental hospital because he was incorrigible, and they thought he was really difficult to handle, and he was having problems. So he was always kind of concerned that people were going to think he was totally nuts, that he would wind back up in a facility someplace. So this always was concern to him when Semjase would press him to go out into the public arena. Early on, too, in the contacts, the Pleiadians were making it clear to Billy that the purpose of his education was to get information out to the general public, speaking, putting out books and so forth, and letting the world know about this, because they were very adamant about the main part of their reason for coming was to try to educate us about the universe, about life, who we are, things that we would call philosophy or spirituality. And throughout all of the contacts, there's quite a bit of information about that. I have not interjected too much of that to this point, just a little of it, because it was kind of sporadic throughout the meetings whenever they would start talking about it. So again, like in the Talmud information, I've assembled that all in kind of one coherent straight through message and put it on the 2 tapes in your series called the Creation Tapes. Actually, one of them is called the Semjase Spirit Lessons, which is Semjase speaking on the philosophy of life based from a Pleiadian point of view. Then there's the tapes marked Creation, and those have more of, I guess you'd call them the spiritual laws on them or something like that. But that's where most all that information is. Instead of just putting the little pieces of it here and there, I tried to put it all together in one coherent statement, so you can listen to those just on their own. Before she leaves, Billy has a couple more questions that he has to ask. He's concerned once again about other people claiming to have contacts with other entities and other life forms in other worlds. Excuse me. Semjase again tells him that there are no other life forms living in our solar system, and that no one on Earth is having any contacts with other entities. As a matter of fact, she goes so far as to tell Billy that he is the only person on Earth having contacts with ETs. But in another part of the notes, they also suggest that about 3,000 ships a year come in, and occasionally ETs do have contacts with people, but maybe only for one time or so. So there seems to be some contradiction here, but I think what they're making reference is the fact that Billy was the only one having ongoing contacts of his particular nature. And that's probably true. There doesn't seem to be any other cases on record so far of anyone having contacts the way that he has had. Billy is also at a point where he's getting kind of upset and frustrated because he's having a lot of problems at home, and he's trying to, do something about that. So she's trying to comfort him to keep going, and again she suggests that perhaps he could sell some crystals or something. And she hammers home again the fact that Billy is the first person in 2,000 years that has been able to be in contact with higher intelligence. That the Pleiadians for the past few weeks have been putting Billy in contact with a higher form of consciousness for his own spiritual growth, and also so he can put a book together on this particular subject. So Even though things are getting kind of difficult for him, she's pushing him to hang in there and so forth and hang on. That if he gives up, this is the interesting part. She's saying, well, it's your decision if you want to go on. And Billy's saying, well, I've got to get a job or something because things are tough at home and I don't have any money. And she's saying things like, well, it's your decision, but of course if you have to get a job, then mankind will suffer. That if you have to get a job and we have to discontinue our contacts, then she's putting all this pressure on Billy that the development of Earth itself will suffer from this. And I know after, this is in 1975, and I know I didn't meet Billy till 86, I guess it was. And even then, in the summer of 87 and 88, when I was there, Billy had the same feeling that he had somehow let the Earth down, that he felt by the fact that the contacts had come to an end years earlier, that he somehow had failed the Earth. So there was all this pressure on him, even at this early time back in June of 75, that they were pressuring him to make him feel like the entire fate of the Earth was dependent upon his shoulders. And here's the poor little guy that's trying to do his best to understand all this information, write it down. He's got a wife at home and kids that need attention, need money, and need help, and he's not providing well as a father, and that makes him feel bad. So he's in a rather tough predicament here, and she's really not trying to help him out very much. She's suggesting that they would help as far as crystals and so forth, but she's leaning on him all the time and reminding him how valuable he is, how important he is, how evolved he is, important he is, how evolved he is. There's really a lot of psychological pressure on Billy at this time to deliver. On another note, he asked her at one time about government on how they make decisions and so forth. And she mentioned that the Pleiadian worlds, of which as I understand there are 3, that the Pleiadians belong to an alliance of about 127 billion people on a variety of planets that all belong to a certain alliance. And they have come together and have agreed upon certain rules and laws governing their section of space and how they do things. And under these laws follows the rules on contacting lower species like ourselves and what they can do and what they can't do. So apparently they do have a large alliance. It's a collection of human and non-human races. And quite frequently throughout the context, she would always refer to the fact that she would have to get permission from her council. And her council refers to a group of people in the Pleiadian worlds who make the decisions for the Pleiadians based on information they get from this alliance. The head of the alliance apparently is a very highly advanced group in the Andromeda galaxy that offers information or advice to the alliance, and then these people take it back to their planet, discuss it among themselves, and then they decide what's good for their own race. That's kind of their form of government. Interestingly enough, they don't have voting like we do. Their world, everyone has to agree. Here, if we have a 51% majority, you can be president. But on their world, it takes a much larger percentage. They figure, and if all the people don't agree, then there could be some valid reasons for it, and they like for everyone to agree, so they work everything out until all are in accord. On his 25th contact, which was June 16th, 1975, Semjase informs Billy that the group demonstration that she was intending to have has been called off. Now, Billy's group members have been asking him time and time again, can they see the ship? Can they meet Semjase? I mean, I would do the same. That was certainly one of my interests when I was going over there. I was hopeful that something like that might happen. And I can imagine the excitement back in 75 from the group members that were helping Billy when he was having contacts regularly, that they would certainly be excited about wanting to see the ships. So they were waiting in anticipation because Semjase had said a group demonstration would be forthcoming. Well, apparently she changed her mind. And she changed her mind, she said, because after examining the thoughts of some of the group members, she found them to be, in her words, were not mature enough and could not understand what was going on. She explained that they felt that certain members of the group were of such low evolution or such low understanding and mentality that they would not take the demonstration correctly, that they would misunderstand, that they were not spiritually developed enough to properly, absorb this, I guess. I guess they felt if they made themselves visible to these people, that this would kind of overload them, that no longer would there be room for doubt in their minds. Normally we go through life making, kind of rationalizations about things, and we say, Well, we don't have the real answer, so we make up our own answer about something. Like, we really don't know what God is yet on our world, so we just make up our own reasoning and our own logic, and we subscribe to whatever religious group kind of goes along with our thinking, and that's our acceptable standard. But if something were to come along, like if we had irrefutable proof that God was this, or God was that, or there was no God at all, and it was irrefutable, well, there was evidence, where we would have to immediately drop our own logic, and we would have to change our whole view of the world based on this new information, and had no choice. That could be very disruptive to our mentality. And they find the general mentality of most people on earth in that state, a state of confusion, a state of ignorance, and they feel that sometimes facing certain people with irrefutable evidence about things is too much for them. They'll literally kind of overload and turn over in their minds, was the expression. So apparently they felt that certain members in Billy's group really weren't mature enough yet to be faced with irrefutable proof that ETs existed. So she decided to call the demonstration off. So Billy was very concerned. He was going to have to return back to the house and explain to these people that the demonstration had been called off. There may be a future demonstration, but it would only be in some smaller fashion and probably for him only or something. So he didn't have good news to return to the house with. Again, he reiterated to her that he was seriously considering stopping the contacts because of all the pressure at home and the money pressure and things on him. And again, he was told that he would have to decide, that there was a lot of pressure on him. So already in the context, we're only the 28th contact, and the 25th contact, and he's already feeling the pressure of this. Well, all in all, there turned out to be over 130 contacts before it finally ended. So already at the beginning stages of this, there's a lot of pressure on Billy. Billy had a question about talking to spirits, if mediums, seances, things like that were correct, if people could actually talk to the dead. So he asked Tim Yossi about it. He said he had his own viewpoints, but he kind of wished to keep them to himself, which means he probably wasn't too sure himself and didn't want to embarrass himself. So she told him that, well, in 95% of the cases, know that it's fake, it's not true. That generally what mediums do, mediums, whether they're aware of it or not, many of them are very sensitive telepathically, and that they can pick up thoughts from the subconscious of their customers. These thoughts may be old memories and ideas and memories that they've had about a loved one. They can be picked out of the subconscious. The medium then senses them and will tell the customer that they're receiving a message from great Uncle Harry or something, and remind them of something that happened in the past. The customer, because they can't remember it, they've forgotten about it, because their conscious mind can't recall this, they think this is just a wonderment that this lady has actually done this, and surely it must be happening because how else could she know about these things? When actually what's really going on is that the medium is just sensitive telepathically and is pulling that information out of the customer's own subconscious. So it's something to be kind of careful about. She did remark that in some cases there are people who actually can contact the dead. She only knew of 4 people on the planet, she said, that were developed enough, understood it well enough, and actually could do it. None of those people were in Europe, so that would exclude Billy and any of his group members. None of the people were in Europe, and all 4 of the people that had the capability, she says, would never do it for the public, never for money. These were all people who were developed to a point where they were spiritually developed enough, where creationally they understood how to handle this information, and they would never really reveal it to others and do it. So this is suggesting, even though they're telling Billy that he's very evolved and the highest evolved person on the planet and all that he's very special, that he wasn't special enough actually to be one of these people. That there were obviously 4 other people on the planet that were spiritually probably more developed than he was and had these abilities and these understandings that Billy did not have. Okay? So there's some contradiction here that they're feeding Billy, where all along they're telling him he's the most advanced, very special, that he's the highest evolved person on the planet, and then they make these statements where there are apparently 4 other people on the planet more evolved than he that have the ability to contact the dead that Billy doesn't understand. So there are some areas of contradiction here where Billy is being led down a path, and by psychiatry standards, you could say he's almost being brainwashed in some instances without even being aware of it. She did, in summing that up, she did mention also that they don't even feel it's a good idea to talk to the dead, and reminded Billy that a dead spirit, once the spirit passes over into the fine matter world, it doesn't have any more knowledge and information than it did when it left. That once you pass over into the fine matter world, all that goes with you is the current wisdom. It's the wisdom of the experiences that you've just had. There is no creative thinking and no new experiences in the fine matter world. The point is, you don't know any more in the fine matter world than you did when you were here. Actually, even less, because you lose recall, apparently, of many experiences. Mostly, what goes with you is just the wisdom of those experiences. So someone over in the fine matter world couldn't answer your questions now any better than they could when they were here. Apparently, also, it's similar to something like a sleep state in the fine matter world, where it's kind of a cogitating thing, where you kind of cogitate, is the word that Billy used, that you're working out or kind of finishing out, things and experiences that you've had in the things and experiences that you've had in the physical world. This would be very similar to like sleep at night, when the experiences of the day are still kind of working around in the machinery of your subconscious. So she remarked on this because she says, for the most part, spirits don't like being contacted. They don't like being bothered, and they really aren't even interested in sending any information back to the physical plane, and in most cases will lie, make things up, or just play a joke on the human because they don't want to be bothered. It seems to be an attitude they have once they're separated from the physical body. So the Pleiadians don't make any effort to contact the dead. They see nothing helpful about it. She did remark that it can be useful and helpful in some areas once the individual is spiritually developed enough where he can contact higher forms of life. But that's very rare because very few people know how to do it. But in that event, you could contact a higher form of life, a being of higher consciousness and higher knowledge, which, if that being was interested, could transmit knowledge back to you and educate you. The drawback seems to be that it's very difficult to do, and in most cases, a being of higher consciousness will have little interest in sending you any information, and that information that they send may be too much for you. There's something to this learning thing, that you should get information when you need it. If you are working on a particular problem in life and need to solve it, then information pertaining to that problem is useful at the time. If you receive information about something that you don't need, it's not useful. Or if the information is not of the right type, if it is too high information, if it is information that doesn't pertain to the learning steps that you need at the moment, it may only cause frustration, anger, or whatever, and it's not really of any use to you. So it's not a great answer either, just assume that you can contact higher forms of consciousness and that it's going to be a wonderful thing for you. So there are problems at contacting the spirit world. Semyasi then suggested that it might be a while before she gets back to Billy because they have a special mission going. They've apparently been doing some work on Mars and watching something's going on Mars in 1975 that they're very fascinated with, and she wouldn't tell Billy. It was very clear throughout the contacts that on many occasions, well actually quite often, they were very open to Billy that they would not tell him certain things, that they would eliminate information from him on purpose so he would only be hearing the things that he needed to hear for his mission. They would purposefully eliminate information about governments and so forth that he didn't need to know. One, they didn't want people to get the information out of him accidentally. And two, they felt it was a form of protection. If he didn't know something, then he wouldn't be considered, a threat to a government organization. They also informed him on quite a few occasions that they would only tell him part of the truth. It became obvious in some areas of information where they would only tell him half of the truth, and he wouldn't even know that. They would just tell him part of an explanation, and later on he would find out there's more to it, and he'd want to know why they didn't tell him the rest of it. And that came up a couple of times, and she just remarked that they had decided that there were, in each area of information, they would only tell him certain things, and they would only tell him enough information for what he needed to know at the time. So right here, they're already dealing with him on a need-to-know sort of basis. When you sum this up with the way they talk to Billy and so forth, it's plain to see that they regard Billy almost like an experiment or a test case in some cases, where they're trying out to see what he can do, what he can understand. They then feed him information. Like at this point in the context, they were very adamant about him doing public speaking, about getting certain informations out. they were very adamant about him wanting to go out speaking about the ozone problem. And Billy kept kind of balking. He didn't want to do this. He did not want to go out speaking in the public. It's just doesn't suit his personality well. You'd think they'd catch on to that. After you meet Billy only for a little while, you can see right away he's not the public speaking type. Billy's your little guru type. He's the kind of guy you seek out in a quiet cave somewhere and have a beautiful, wonderful, loving conversation with. But he's not your public speaking type. If he was speaking in a crowd, you would probably need, for one, you need a translator. And you would probably need some visual aids or things to help him out. It's not his forte. Well, anyway, as I was mentioning, she told him that it was going to be a while before the next contact because events on Mars were going on and something new was happening. The Apollo-Soyuz hookup was getting ready to happen. The Russians and the Americans were planning a joint capsule venture or satellite venture in space. Billy was a little surprised because he had been told by the Pleiadians that was not going to happen until years later. So apparently their future view can be off too. They were surprised that events had moved forward so fast and they were getting ready to happen. And she commented that they were very, very concerned and wanted to be careful about this mission because they didn't want the Russians or the Americans to learn certain things. That they were concerned that on this mission that the Americans and the Russian team, the scientist team, may come about certain knowledges and cognitions which could be dangerous to mankind, they said. They were afraid that some of this information they may learn in space, if fallen into the wrong hands, could provide entirely too much power to either the Russians or the Americans. Apparently, they say that both the Russians and the Americans were already working on so-called doomsday machines, technologies that were very advanced and could actually cause the destruction of the Earth itself, all in the name of peace, of course. She mentioned to Billy on several occasions on different Apollo missions and even on Earth under certain projects that they would interfere from time to time, causing these projects to go astray, causing the scientists to suddenly lose their memory or certain things to happen so that the projects couldn't be finished in order to slow down the progress of scientists. This was generally always done in areas where it was military-oriented, where scientists were working on something for the military that would be harmful to the planet Earth. So they are affording us some measure of protection, and they are staying involved in certain areas. They are interfering, just plain interfering in our development in certain areas, which I hope is helpful. One other question before we stopped this contact was Billy was concerned that other ETs were also coming here also, and what, these other ETs that come to Earth that the Pleiadians are telling them about, what kind of effect does this have on people? Because there are other people like George Adamski's and other people who are claiming to have contacts, and Billy says, how can you be so sure that they're not? Well, Semyosi told him that yes, there are other splinter groups of the Pleiadians, one in particular called Bafath, B-A-F-A-T-H, we're going to hear more about as we go through the contact notes. There are other groups that continuously do contact human beings from time to time. This one particular group, the Bafath, seems to be very well organized, and it is their MO, their modus operandum, to infiltrate religious leaders and political leaders and instill thoughts of grandeur and ego into their minds, causing them to do certain things. They particularly play on religious leaders, they say, because people who follow religions, that their minds are oriented to being a follower, to being a servant, to worship, to be on their knees, to information and so forth. These people are easily controlled. And if through religious leaders they can implant thoughts into these people, then they can control their thoughts. Apparently, the Bafath, for years, a small group, much smaller than the whole Pleiadian nation, has been concerned and has been trying to control the planet Earth through force. They can't openly do this because their existence would be confronted, of course, by the Pleiadians and the others that protect the planet. But the Bafath seem to be doing their dirty work on the side. We'll learn later on that even back in the 50s, there was a large group of people, a list provided to Billy when he was a teenager of over 700 religious and political leaders around Earth that were being broadcast delusions during their sleep and so forth by the Bafath. Our subconscious is very open and susceptible when we're sleeping, and it's possible for these beings and for the Pleiadians to literally push information, ideas, and thoughts and dreams into our thoughts, and we will have no idea where they come from. You'll think it's your own decision making. So this could be, of course, be very dangerous. And she told Billy that yes, it is happening, but they really can't do anything about it. For one, they don't know when it's happening. They can't detect happening. They can't detect it. And they said, well, it's just unfortunate, but it does happen. They can't stop it because there's no way to really detect when it's going on, and would hope that the Earth human being would start following a more spiritual path and learn to develop his own personal spiritual strength and knowledges so he could defend himself against this sort of thing. This was one of the reasons why they kept coming back to this idea of religions, of worship, of being subservient and believing in gods and idols and so forth, that this makes us very susceptible to this sort of thing, and then we do not take responsibility for ourselves. People who generally tend to worship and are followers do not take responsibility for their own life. They're always blaming the problems of their life on other things. Like, well, gee, I can't get this job because, well, it's just the way God meant it, or it's just the way things ought to be, or whatever leader they're following, whatever the name of their religious belief may be, they would blame it on that, and they just chalk it up to, well, that was God's will, or that's the way I guess it's going to be. And that's not true. We are all 100% responsible for ourselves. We are all 100% responsible for our own actions and our own personal growth. This is probably the main, if there was any particular one statement that the Pleiadians are really trying to get across to us, it's that. It's get off your knees and take responsibility for yourself. This is your life. We go through a period, a succession of material lives in order to gather information to feed our spirit truth. That's the purpose of our life. That is the meaning for it. So in order to do that, you must learn to be clear thinking, clear and balanced when you gather this information. It is the purpose of our life to feed ourselves. You feed your stomach food, you feed your spirit truth. You feed it wisdom so it can carry forward and grow. That's the whole purpose of what life is all about. So if you are caught up in some sort of religious delusion or grandeur, what are you going to be feeding yourself? Delusion and, lies and deceit. So they look at us as a planet of spiritual stagnation, a planet of hundreds of different belief structures and ideas, idols and so forth, and they would like to see us, and they know that we must grow up. We know that they know we must start being responsible for ourselves, and they're very concerned that we're going to develop technology and speed off into space with our spiritual stagnation and all of our religions and our anger and hate and greed and power. And we're going to go speeding out there with that attitude, and we're going to run into some very dangerous adversaries who would take us out in a second. That could be, it could throw mankind back into, total slavery and primitive times again, if we were to do that. They are far more hopeful that the light workers, the leaders, the way preparers, the prophets, the more spiritually advanced people on our planet can make some breakthroughs. And by providing role model and inspiration to others, and inspiration again is the key here, that we can help other people on our planet develop more spiritually so this planet can be taken back and we can get our planet back and live in a more spiritual, more creative, creational way and get rid of the current structure of power and greed and mayhem. And then when we move out into space, we can align ourselves with them and other peaceful races and have much better hope for our entire civilization. So that kind of summarized up through the first 25 contacts through June of 1975. Okay, now we're up to June 25th. He had his 27th contact. Up to now, all the contacts had been situations where Semjase would telepathically get in touch with Billy and direct him to a certain location. And Billy would ride his little moped out and meet her, sometimes at night, but most of the time during the day. But it was getting a little bit more difficult because people were starting to follow Billy, and it was getting difficult for him. And he lived in a little town called Hinwil at that time. And word was getting out more and more about what he was doing. And a lot of the locals kind of frowned on it and thought he was kind of strange. And so things weren't real comfortable for him. But he was still going out and meeting Semjase on these contacts on the ground. he had not ridden in the ships yet. But things were to change, because on this particular contact, Semjase informed him, says, surprise, get ready, we're going to go for a trip. And she said, would you like to go for a ride in the ship? And he said, of course, when? And she said, how about today? So they did, and she said what she had planned was she was going to take him on a little ride in the ship up to Saturn, and they would go by Mars and also go by Jupiter and come back, which they did. And Billy didn't seem too surprised, which kind of was drawn to Semjase's attention. She was searching his thoughts and found that he was almost emotionless, that the idea of going for a flight to other worlds didn't seem to get him that excited. So I know it would certainly get me excited anyway. Well, anyway, she landed the ship and directed him mentally to where she was parked, and he went there. When he got there, they talked for a few minutes, and after explaining what they were going to do, they started walking towards the beam ship. And Billy says that there was no steps or anything involved, that somehow as they were getting close to the ship, they just floated right up into it, and the hatch just shut right behind them. And he doesn't have any idea really how that works, but when he got inside of the ship, he had his camera with him, and she told him that he'd be able to take pictures. He could take pictures on the out the windows of the ship, and he could also take pictures inside the ship on these little side screens they have. And it's television screens that allow them to see things, whatever they want to see. So Billy right away noticed that inside of the ship it was kind of green, the colorization in the air, and the windows were green, but from the outside the windows appeared orange. So he asked her for an explanation, why the windows, if they were glass, why were they different? She explained that on the outside of the glass, there was some sort of coating or something on the glass that detected the atmosphere. It would let them know if the atmosphere was harmful. And when they were down on the ground like this, where in the normal atmosphere, the windows would appear orange outside, and they would be green on the inside. And that was a sign that everything was okay, that the atmosphere was usable, they could get out. If for some reason they landed somewhere and there were different colors, reds, blues, or greens, whatever, that came through the window, if the windows changed that color, they'd know that there was a problem. And that they'd have to wear some sort of atmospheric suit before they could get out of the ship. Also, if the windows were a different color, it would not allow them to open the hatch and get out of the ship. They couldn't do that accidentally unless they had their atmospheric suit on. So there is some intelligence going on in the ship here. Later on, we're going to find out that the intelligence in the ships are primarily organic, that they're growing what we think of as computers, that the ships are somewhat intelligent and can actually do some of their own thinking, which you have to figure for a race that evolved much, way beyond us. It's probably not such a big surprise. Well, anyway, once inside of the ship, they take off, and Billy notices as they get out of the atmosphere that the windows turn clear. And she said, yeah, when you're not in an atmosphere, they turn clear and you can see through them. Also, the windows block out radiations. So if you're looking out the window and it should be a comet or you go by a sun or something, that the radiations are blocked so there's no harmful effects from pressing your face up and looking out the window. That's probably what I'd be doing. I'd be right over at the window with my nose against the glass, looking out like, what's going on? Well, inside of the ship, too, they had several side screens that they could watch on. Well, this was a rather short trip by their standards. It took 2 hours and 34 minutes, and they went, as it's expressed in the contact notes, they traveled 3,000 million kilometers, which would be equal to 3 billion kilometers that they went. And as I don't know the exact route they took, but I know they went by Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars, and then returned. When they got back and sat down, Billy, for some reason, was just as emotionless, and she was a little surprised that he wasn't more excited than he was, but he assured her that, it had made quite an impact on him. He was just thinking about it. He was just considering about all the things that he had seen, but he didn't act excited. I know I'd probably be jumping around in the ship going, yeah, wow. Probably have a little trouble containing myself there, but there weren't any other remarks in the contact notes about these things. Except later on it does mention that around Mars they were careful, that there was something going on Mars and he was not able to take any pictures there. They wouldn't even get too close to the planet. They apparently got much closer to Jupiter and Saturn. He got some nice close-up shots on Saturn and on Jupiter also. So unfortunately though, those pictures didn't come out. When he got his film back, they were all blank. He goofed up something on the camera, and that rather historic trip, there are no shots of it whatsoever. It was only a couple of days after that for his 28th contact, which was a telepathic contact. Up till this time, Billy's contacts had all been with Semjase. And she contacted him telepathically and said that her base commander, whose name is Quetzal, wanted to meet Billy and wanted to talk to him. Well, Billy had not met Quetzal or any of the other Pleiadians up to this time, so he was a little surprised. And he was actually a little taken back, and he says, well, what does the big chief want to talk to me about? Have I done something wrong? She said no, he just wanted to meet him, and that he had a few things he wanted to tell him. So she says, please pay attention, and he did. And telepathically, then he started receiving, actually he says he could hear the voices right in his head, and he was listening to Quetzal. Quetzal was the base commander over all of the bases and Pleiadian action on the planet Earth. And I don't know how long he'd been at that particular position, but he said hello to Billy, was happy to meet him, and had some responses to a book written by a lady named Gloria Lee that a couple of people in Billy's group were reading at the time. And this book apparently was all about Gloria Lee claiming to have contacts with extraterrestrials. And he wanted to assure Billy that it was not true, that this lady, Gloria Lee, had not had any contacts with extraterrestrials, and it had not really taken place. So they chatted for a while and pushed thoughts back and forth, and that was his first introduction to one of the other Pleiadians. So it had been 28 contacts before this had happened, and this one was telepathic, by the way. On his next contact, Billy met Semjase, and they were talking, and this again was a ground contact. He had some questions, since now he was an interplanetary traveler. He had some questions about Venus, because in our past, quite a few UFO contactees have claimed to have been having contacts with Venus or knowing people from Venus, and Billy asked again if this was true, and she assured him that no, Venus historically, like she had mentioned before, had only come into its present orbit about 3,453 years ago. There was no life on Venus, and she remarked to him also that Venus originally, as I think I mentioned earlier, was a moon around Uranus. And 8,000 years back, it had been knocked out of its orbit by the Large Destroyer comet. It had been pushed into two other orbits closer to Earth. And then finally, at 3,453 years back, it moved into the orbit that it was in now. So originally, it was an ice-covered moon around Uranus. It had a lot of moisture on it, but was covered with ice. But when it passed close around the sun and moved into its final orbit, all that ice was greatly heated up, and it became like a cloud, a vapor of clouds all around the planet, and that's how we see it today. And for 3,000 years or so, it's been like that, where it's been very, very hot. So she gave Billy a few statistics about Venus that he could use to compare notes with other people in case someone said they knew something about Venus. She wanted him to know the vital statistics of the planet. So here's a few things that she told him. For one thing, when the planet Venus came into the orbit it was in, its rotation is much different than ours. It's very, very slow. It turns in the opposite direction that the Earth does. And a day on Venus is only is equal to 117 days on Earth. So every time we have a 24-hour day, I'd have to quickly add that up, 117 times 24. That's how many hours it takes for a day in Venus. There is no life at all on Venus of any form. There is some equipment there. They do have some equipment there, but very little because of the intense heat there. The surface temperature on Venus is 450 degrees Celsius, which is very hot. So that's just about the temperature it would take to melt lead. So, as a matter of fact, she remarked that one of the unusual features on Venus was that they had noted there that a Russian probe that had been sent there a few years before, she didn't say when, a Russian probe had landed on Venus, and when it hit, it looked, she says, just like somebody had taken something and splattered against a metal wall. It just looked like so much solder on the ground. It had melted and just splattered right against the surface. I remember when that happened, as a matter of fact, the Russian satellite was shooting towards Venus, and then they just suddenly lost contact with it. So apparently what has happened is it got close to Venus, and then as it moved in and started descending down to Venus, it got too hot and just melted and just splat right into the side of the planet. At sea level, the atmospheric pressure there is 334 times greater than Earth's. The atmosphere is 87% carbon dioxide, which would be very difficult for you and I to breathe. We couldn't. It'd be poisonous to us. Oxygen exists at levels of 4.23% in the air. Nitrogen and other rare gases count for 55.47%. There's very few water vapors on the planet at all. It's all in the clouds. The pressure of Venus's atmosphere is 107 times greater than Earth's. There is actually no water on the surface of the planet to support life. I suppose at that temperature that would make sense. So it's going to be some time before the planet actually cools down and the very beginnings of life could get started there. They have the magnetic field on the planet is very low. The Van Allen girdle is very weak, and the solar wind factor, she says, is not screened well at all. At least those things don't mean too much to me, but they might to someone that's more scientific minded. She says the surface of Venus is very flat around the equator, around the center part of the planet, and there's mountains up in the higher range. The temperature is about the same day or night. There are very great differences in the wind between the low flat areas and the high mountainous regions. In the high mountainous regions, there are very high winds reaching up to about 117 meters per second. Okay. The cloud level, the vapor level of clouds around the planet, about as low as those get are 43.17 kilometers on the average, except of course when they have storms and so forth there. The average mountain height on Venus averages 2.3 kilometers. She says there is life on Venus, but it is nothing like human form or human shape. She didn't say exactly what it was. It might be some sort of biological life or something on there because there was moisture at one time. But she says for the most part, if you just look up at the moon at night and see it just crater-filled and barren and so forth, that's what Venus looks like. And then if you just cover it with clouds, then that's what you have. They have to be careful, she says, also sometimes there, because on certain areas of Venus, the temperature will rise suddenly greater than 500 degrees Celsius on the surface. The mixture of carbon dioxide, nitrogen, helium, argon, and neon gases fluctuate occasionally. The atmospheric pressure varies from 88 to 107. So that's pretty incredible there. So Venus is a planet that used to be a moon, has now become a planet, is in a stable orbit, but is in the very first development stages, so it's going to be quite some time before there could be any life there. Possibly in our own technology, once we get off our planet, then Venus is not that far away. That may, after Mars, which would probably be our first planet we'll inhabit, Venus could possibly be the second. At least it is a solid, hard planet, and it would be possible there if we could find some way to cool it down. So our technology may advance to that point sometime, and Venus, maybe somewhere in a couple thousand years, whatever, might be possible to control the environment there and habitate it. We might even be able to change its orbit and move it a little bit farther out or something so it was in a little bit cooler orbit than it is right now. Okay? So that gives us some vital statistics on Venus there that we might use to compare to other things. At the end of this contact, she told Billy some pretty good news. She said that they and the others had decided to take him with them, and they were going to be making a trip to the Pleiades and to another universe, a neighboring universe. And apparently there was a barrier between these universes, something built by the Timur race, which we'll hear more about later on, and they would be going through that. And Billy remarked, "Oh boy, we're going to go to the edge of the universe." And she said, "No, we do not search for the edge of the universe, because such does not exist." So apparently there's a barrier, a way to get between them, but there is no edge to our universe. Okay, I see we're coming to the end of this side of the tape, so you'll need to put in tape 3, and I'll see you there. Okay, we're back. Here we are on tape 3, and this is a really fascinating tape because up to now Billy's experiences and contacts have pretty much all been on the planet Earth. But things are changing now. He's up to his 31st contact, which takes place on July 17th, 1975. Just a couple of days before this, Semjase has contacted Billy telepathically and asked him to prepare for a surprise for a rather long mission. That she and the others have decided to take Billy to the Pleiades and that they have some other things to do, and they're on a certain mission of their own, and they plan to take Billy with them for a period of time, actually amounting to several days. But they mentioned to him that he would only be gone for about 30 hours. So apparently they plan to return him, somehow kind of making some sort of time shift. So the time comes and Billy's ready. He gets some extra film together and his camera, and he heads out for the location. He again is feeling the familiar telepathic cooling on his forehead, receives a message from Semjase, hears the voices in his head, and he's off to the contact. Well, she picks him up. First of all, she's on the ground when he gets there. The ship is already parked, and they talk for a minute. She explains to him what they're going to do, that they're going to go for a ride, and that they're going to go visit several other planets, and ask him if he has his film with him, which he does. So she says, well, all right, let's get going. So they walk over to where the beam ship is parked, and Billy notices once again that there are no steps involved or anything. They just seem to float right up into the hatch of the ship. Now the hatch is in the bottom center of the ship, and they pull right up inside of the ship. Billy's got his camera ready, and before he can hardly even get oriented, the ship is already leaving the ground, and the hatch is still open. So he manages to snap a picture or two in the open hatch of the ground as it's kind of racing away from him. And already they're pulling away from Earth. Well, she informs Billy that the first part of their trip today, that she's going to give him a ride to Venus and Mercury. And they're going to fly by those planets, and she has some things to show him. And he says, well, will I be able to take pictures this time? And she says, yeah. Now, we know the difficulty quite sometimes that your camera has inside of the ship and that you have focusing that little camera. So they had designed something for him to help take the pictures so he wouldn't have to take them through the sight screen, the little board windows they call them on the ship, which sometimes are in different colors because of the atmosphere, the radiation outside, and mess the pictures up. Billy, as a matter of fact, snaps a couple of pictures as they're leaving planet Earth on that day, and they come out kind of green, just like she said they would, because the board windows reflect green in our atmosphere. They're orange on the outside, and as the light comes through them, it appears green on the inside. So whenever he takes pictures inside out through the window in an atmosphere, he gets this green thing. There are a couple of pictures in his collection. You can see the ship in front of him as they pull it out of Earth, and there's another one far out in front. So there's all three of them leaving that particular day. Well, they made for him a special screen for photographing. And Billy said it looked like a plain, just a sheet of glass, almost, with kind of a border around it. And she says, well, this will allow you to get pictures on the surface of the planet and other areas without taking the pictures through the windows of the ship, which doesn't always work well. So Billy looked at the glass and held it in his hands, and he said it was about 50 centimeters square. And when he looked at the glass, you could see outside the ship. It apparently somehow had the ability to, wherever you kind of aimed the glass, it would see outside the ship. Something much like a video camera mounted on the outside of the ship might show up on a television screen. So he said, well, how do I work this? And he says, well, there's really nothing to do. You can just aim your camera at this little screen, this plate of glass, and take a picture of whatever's on the plate. And that should allow you to get a little better picture. So he's kind of fiddling with that and looking around the ship, and they're on their way to Venus, which it isn't going to take very long to get there. He's noticing all around the ship, and it's circular inside, that there are all sorts of instruments and screens and all over the ship. The middle of the ship, there's kind of a round table that has a lot of instruments on that. And over on the, I guess you call it the console, where she actually controls the ship, there's a lot of different screens there, but he notices that they're quite different than like our television screens, which are normally flat, just one-dimensional things. That the screens inside of the ship seem to be kind of like holograms or some sort of 3D effect. That when you look at the picture on the screen, you don't get the effect of looking at a screen. It actually, excuse me, almost looks like you're looking at the real thing. So they're already arriving at Venus, and she apparently slows the ship down, and he takes a couple of pictures on his little sight screen of the planet as they're approaching it. Then she cautions him and says that they're going to fly down on the surface of the planet now, but he won't be able to use this screen that they've made for him for photographing, which is kind of curious. And he says, why? He says, well, it also it's heat sensitive, and that the planet Venus is very hot. In some parts it's up to 500 degrees Celsius on the surface temperature, and that this screen somehow is affected by heat. It can sense cold and withstand cold very well, but it doesn't withstand heat very well. So he wouldn't be able to use this screen for these particular pictures of Venus, although he can use them for pictures in the rest of the mission, the flight. But so here he has to go over and he takes pictures of Venus on the sight screens, these 3D or hologram screens, whatever they are, inside of the ship. They proceed to lower the craft down. The beam ship lowers down in the clouds because Venus is covered with a cloud bank. And Billy kind of notices how long it takes to slowly sink down through the clouds. When they finally come out into open air where they can see the planet, he is told by Semjase that they're about 40 kilometers still above the surface of Venus. He notices right away it looks just like our moon. It's just craters and kind of a sandy, rocky-looking desert sort of thing, just kind of like the way we see the moon. And this is the same way that Semjase had told him that it would be, that it really looks just like our moon with a cloud bank all around it. He notices that the surface of Venus is kind of very flat, just like she said, around the equator. It's kind of smooth. And he says, well, I'd be able to take pictures of other parts of Venus. And she said, sure, that's just exactly what she had in mind. And she, immediately, the beam ship just starts skimming over the surface of Venus, and they circle Venus 3-4 times, something like that, and Billy's snapping several pictures as they go. Then immediately the beam ship just snaps out into space, and within a few minutes they rush right over to the planet Mercury. And it says in the notes that nothing really eventful happened there. He just snaps a couple of pictures of Mercury, and they're off back out into the free space. It mentions in the notes that they also fly by Jupiter and Saturn, which Billy had been to before and already taken a couple of pictures, which didn't come out. So he's able to snap a couple of others. And again, he asks if there's any life forms of any types on these planets, and she remarks, no, there are not. However, there are ETs that have bases on some of the moons. And she didn't elaborate on which ones or what they were doing there, but says that on some of the moons, which are actually solid ground little planet sort of things, that they have equipment there, and that they and other ETs do use that. But other than that, there are no living species there. There are no civilizations there. There are no spirit form life there either. There's no intelligent life of any kind living on Jupiter or Saturn. They're not even real planets. They're just gaseous balls. Okay, very uninhabitable sort of place. So it would make sense that no living creature with any intelligence would want to be there, and for what possible reason. Well, after doing that, they immediately shoot back into the space right around the planet Earth. And Billy's watching on the screens, and he's surprised to see that he sees a little Russian capsule. And he looks closely out there, and he sees the initials CCCR on the back of the capsule. And she explains to him that this is the Russian space capsule that has been shot up into space, and space capsule that has been shot up into space and is going to hook up with the Apollo capsule quite soon. And they've been very concerned about this, as we mentioned earlier, about the knowledge that would be gained from this particular mission by the Russians and by the Americans, and they did intercede somewhat, causing certain things not to be learned that they felt that we weren't quite ready for yet, that may be misused just for, war or whatever. Billy notices that there are 5 other saucers like their own around the capsule. I guess it looks kind of crowded up there. And he looks through the window of the beam ship and can't see anything. And then he looks over on the screens inside of the ship and he can see the 5 other discs. She remarks to begin with that only one of them is Pleiadian, that the other 4 discs are all from different races that are also interested in what's going on here. And he asks, why can't I see them through the window? She says, well, they have their own screens, that distortion screens, that protect them from being seen so that they won't be visible. But these screens on the inside of the ship have the ability to see them, even though they're cloaked or hidden by these distortion screens. They fly very close by the Russian capsule, and Billy's just kind of surprised how small it is. And he says, I can't believe how little that thing is. It looks like a little flying coffin in there. And She says, well, here, let me show you a little bit closer. And she says, would you like to see inside of the capsule? And he says, how is that possible? And she says, well, with our technology, we can see through the side of the capsule. And immediately on the screens inside of the ship, Billy is seeing that. And he's kind of surprised that suddenly it looks like a cutaway. You can see the two Russians inside of the capsule, and they're kind of laying in a horizontal mode there. And he's a little surprised, and she says, no, calm yourself, don't worry, this isn't having any effect on the capsule, it's just a visual effect. We can see through the side of the thing. And again, he's thinking to himself, what a miserable situation that is to be locked inside that little box, and he's thinking like a coffin. And Semjase says, careful there, dig deep into your thoughts, that those feelings of fear you have of being in a coffin relate to a previous life somewhere, and that's still some sort of trauma that you're carrying with you into this life. And she tells him to, when he has time, to trouble himself for following those thoughts to find out more about it. And again, he's a little confused because he can't quite grasp what she's talking about yet. Billy immediately notices that the Apollo satellite, which now comes into position, is quite a bit bigger. And she explains, that's because it carries the linking equipment. Well, the linking takes place, the docking hooks up, and the two Russians float over into the American capsule. And again, they look inside the American capsule, and Billy notices that there's quite a bit more equipment and dials and knobs or whatever in the American capsule, and it's a little bit larger. Then he notices on the screen that one of the Americans bumps his head inside of the capsule. He's apparently not used to the weightlessness and bumps his head and kind of rubs it. And Billy chuckles a little bit and says, you notice, and remarks how cramped the quarters are in there. After that, they don't stay around any longer. Then they take off immediately, and Semjase reports that some of the others there would be gathering information, and they're going to keep watching this event. But they take off. Say they've got, Semjase says they have a lot of things to do, and she takes off into free space again and says that they're now going to hook up with this great spacer vehicle of theirs and continue their mission. And Billy is kind of left alone, deep in his thoughts for a few minutes as he's just looking out the windows of the ship and looking on the screens, and he kind of gets lost in his thoughts and drifting away, and he suddenly just starts feeling these sensations of tranquility and peace and being at ease. And he's feeling very comfortable out here in space. And he's noticing the many different stars and cloud formations and nebulas which are appearing on some of the screens inside of the ship. And all in all, he's just becoming very, very tranquil and comfortable, and he's having these wonderful feelings of kind of euphoric feeling about him, while he's traveling through the space. And Semjase again remarks that, once again, your feelings are digging deep into feeling comfortable, because these somehow connect also to a previous time for you, and tells him to trouble again to search in his thoughts for connecting thoughts about this. So they're always teasing him, you might say, or intriguing him with these ideas of places that he has lived and things that he has done in previous lives, and to search for it himself and try to figure them out. Well, they approach the Great Spacer, and they call it a Great Spacer. It'd be similar to what many people call a mothership. It's kind of unusual looking. It's not disc shaped. There's no need for the disc shape out into the free space, because normally the disc shape is used in smaller vehicles where there are planets with atmospheres and water, etc. But out in free space, on a very large craft like this, there's no need for the disc-type shape. So when they approach the Great Spacer, Billy's a little surprised. Matter of fact, he snaps a picture. It looks kind of like a great big egg. And down at the bottom of the egg, there were either 3 or 4, I forget exactly, smaller kind of round-shaped things that are hooked with the large body of the ship, some sort of connecting bars or something. It's kind of an unusual-looking device. And out in front of their ship, as he notices on the screens, there are 4 or 5 other discs like theirs, which are also pulling in, it looks like, to like a landing hatch or something, and one of these small balls that's on the bottom of the large one. Off to the left of the screen is a large planet, which looks like Jupiter. And it's suggestive in the notes that this Great Spacer is somehow in orbit around the planet Jupiter. They fly right into the bottom of this large object and land in an area, and they stay inside the ship for a few moments. Billy notices that the around the ship when they came in, he looks out the window and he sees that there are hundreds of other ships, all rather similar to the one that they're flying in, and he can also see some strange looking craft that he can't tell if they're flying things or what, but they are far different shapes than the beam ships. And she explains to Billy that this is their largest ship in its class. It's their newest technology. It's just 4 years old at that point, and that it came about really because of Ascot. Billy's a little taken back. He said, "Ascot? Do you know Ascot?" And because he had contacts with Ascot when he was a teenager, long before he had the contacts with Semjase. And he was not even aware that Semjase knew Ascot. And Ascot at the time told him that he would have to keep quiet about his contacts with her and not to discuss them with anyone, which Billy had not. And now suddenly Semjase is bringing up all about Ascot and suggesting, that that's where they got the technology for the ship. And Billy wants to know, says, "Well, what do you know about Ascot and me?" And Semjase says, "Well, I know everything about it, that Ascot and I are friends, and I know all about your contacts earlier." And Billy's kind of surprised. He says, "Well, I was supposed to keep quiet about that until I received some sort of sign that it would be okay to talk about those contacts." Well, Semjase says, "Well, consider this the sign. This is it, that at this point from now on, we would like you to take the information that you got from Ascot's contacts and use those, write those up." And she wanted to know then that if Billy still had all of his notes from those contacts from back 56 through 64. And he said yes, that he did. And she says, "Well, it would be time for you to get those out and to put those into your notes." Billy wanted to know how she knew Ascot, and Semjase said that after Billy had his contacts with Ascot after they'd ended in 1964, Ascot, being aware of the Pleiadians, had made contact with them and come to their planet. And one thing led to another. There became open commerce between their two societies. One of the outshots of that was that Ascot's people, who are called Timmers, provided the Pleiadians with the data and technical knowledge to build the great spacer that they were in. And that it had only been 4 years ago that they finally created this craft. And up until that time, up until about 9 years back, they had never had the ability even for time travel. The Pleiadians themselves are not a race that try very hard for the technical knowledge. They mostly seem to be kind of spiritual people. And even though they're far older and far advanced of us, they had never really made the efforts to break through in the knowledge of time travel. Ascot's people, the Timmers, come from another universe that they call the Dal universe. And their technology technically was far more sophisticated than the Pleiadians, and they had kind of exchanged information with the Pleiadians, swapping their technical knowledge for some of the spiritual things that the Pleiadians knew about. So that's how the great ship came about, and it had time travel capabilities, could move in the future or the past, and that's where the design actually came from. The Timmers, by the way, the Pleiadians estimate that are probably about 350 years and evolved higher than the Pleiadians are. So at that point, they get outside of the ship, and the air apparently inside of the hangar now is being conditioned, whatever, so they can get out. They get outside of the ship, and Billy's looking around at how big the place is. The ceiling seems to be like 600 to 800 meters high. And almost as far as he can see, there are all sorts of flying craft parked inside there. Almost instantly, a little floating kind of platform pops up beside them, or just drifts over somehow. And Billy likens it about to the size of a Volkswagen. And they just sit down on it. And they start floating up in the air very comfortably, and they're rising almost straight up. And Billy looks up above and sees that there's a rather large hole up in the ceiling. And they seem to be floating up towards them. And she says, "Yeah, we're going to go right up into the ship." And Billy, after just a minute or so, he's saying, "My, we're getting awful high. How high have we gone up? How big is this thing?" And she remarks, "Well, so far we've gone up 11,000 meters. And he's quite surprised. He says, 11,000 meters, that's higher than the highest mountain on Earth, Mount Everest. And she kind of chuckles and says, well, yes, you're right, but the highest mountain on Earth is not Mount Everest. And Billy says, come on, now I know my geography. Our highest mountain is Mount Everest. And she says, well, that's because your scientists measure the highest mountain from sea level. We don't. We measure from the center of the planet. And because around the center of the planet, around the equator, it's farther from the center of the planet, that actually the highest mountain on Earth, the way they measure it, would be in Ecuador. And Billy says, oh yes, I remember from my geography studies, in Ecuador there's a mountain range, or there's a mountain called the Chimborazo or something like that. And she says, now you've got it. That's the highest mountain range on Earth if you measure it from the core of the planet. Well, as they float up, suddenly the little floating craft, whatever it is they're on, just floats over to the side. They're in some sort of great big open area where it just floats up through the ship. And as they're going up, they keep noticing off to the left and the right, there are all these different kind of levels. And they're going by, many of them. And suddenly they float over the side and sits right down on the ground and they get off. Billy steps out and he's just knocked out. What he's looking at, he says, looks like the most beautiful garden he's ever seen. They're in a huge area which serves as a recreation area for the people on the ship. She remarks that there's 143,000 people living on this great spacer, and that it is completely self-contained. It contains everything you need, almost like living on a normal world. It has outside recreational areas, lakes, streams. They can fly. They can grow all of their own food. They are completely self-sufficient on this great spacer. And this area that they're in is kind of a recreational facility. It's an outside area with real mountains, streams, lakes, everything, and it's huge, almost as far as you can see in here. Billy is just flabbergasted by the size of this thing, and he wants to know how big this craft really is. And she remarks that, well, the diameter of it, where we're right now in the main part of the ship, the diameter of it is 17,182 meters, which is over 10 miles in diameter. So you get some idea how big this thing is. And it's much taller. I don't know the exact height it is, but it's far taller than it is wide because it's kind of an egg shape. So the thing could be as much as maybe 20 miles high. Well, she's explaining all about the recreational facilities and so forth, and what their next thing that they're going to do. She says that that the leader of the spacer, that would be their next stop, that they're going to go up to the top of the ship, on the dome of the ship, where actually it's kind of like the flight center, I guess, the control center where they fly this. And the Billy is going to be allowed to meet the leader, who is an Ishwish, a king of wisdom, who actually is in charge of the ship, the leader of the ship. And Billy immediately says, uh-oh, I'm going to meet a god, huh? And he says, I hope he doesn't expect me to hit my knees and, get down on my knees and bow down to this guy just because he's the god of your people. And he's going on and on, just very politely so, but he's making remarks about, in our folklore, when people think of gods, they think of worship, and they get very rattled, and he's real concerned that this god's going to expect him to hobble or worship him or something. And Semjase starts to break out kind of laughing, and Billy's still going on about how he doesn't expect to grovel at all for any great god, no matter who he is. Suddenly there's this kind of loud boom in the air, and it's kind of like he hears this huge laughter, kind of like a roar across the place that they're at. And he says, what in the world was that? And she says, well, the great god, the Ishwish, up on top was actually listening in to their thoughts. And he also thought it was funny that Billy thought that he would be, a person like that. That Semjase explains in their society that people become Ishwishes because of the wisdom that they attain. They become a king of wisdom. But they are not revered or thought of as any better or less than anyone else. That everyone has equal value on the world, and they gain respect for their knowledge. But there's no groveling, there's no worship, and to be an Ishwish, a king of wisdom, which means God in our language, on their planet, doesn't mean that they're anything particularly special. You can still talk to these people, and they don't put them on any great pedestal and worship them. Well, Semjase says, follow me now, and they go over to another open area where there's another one of these little floating platforms, They get back on it and they float all the way up to the top. And they're in some sort of great big kind of circular open area where there's a lot of other platforms going up and down. And they just float up to the top to this great dome. And when they get up to the top, they stay on this little platform and they're just floating along this huge open area. First thing that Billy notices is he looks up to the ceiling and he can see the stars. And he's immediately kind of surprised that looks like we're outside. There's no ceiling. And she remarks that no, that through these high technology distortion beams they have, they project something at the ceiling and it allows them to see right through it. That actually there is a metal ceiling there that's very strong, very hard, and protects them, so not to worry about it. As they're floating along, Billy notices that it must be several kilometers distance long because he can't even see the end of this. And there are all sorts of people up there working, doing different things. And he notices right away that there are some very peculiar looking humans. And it's explained to him that these are droids. They're organic people that the Pleiadians grow on purpose for specific functions. It would be like what we think of as an android. And Billy's just watching this as they're floating along. He even notices that there are some droids that looks like built right into the equipment where they're only like half a person. And these are beings, she says, that they've learned how to organically grow a brain and program it so it can do particular functions. And they're all over the place like this. Well, they're moving along, and she's explaining to him more about the equipment and where they're at and more about the ship. And Billy glances ahead, and he sees like a big kind of horseshoe-shaped area that they're slowly approaching. And there's a man standing there that's kind of looking at them. He appears to be about 70, 75 years old, and he just kind of gently smiles as they approach it. And they step off the little floating platform, and Semjase immediately runs over to this fellow and grabs him, and they're hugging, and they give each other a big kiss, and they look very, very excited to see each other. And Billy notices that he has kind of a sinking feeling. I think he's just a little bit of jealousy kind of creeps in there because he's Semjase, and whether he knows it or not, he really has strong, heartfelt feelings for her. And so he feels a little bit of a sinking feeling here, a little rivalry, he comments in his notes. And Semjase walks back over with this elderly fellow and says, "I'd like for you to meet Ptah." She says, "This is my father." And Billy is immediately kind of embarrassed that he was feeling that way. And she says, "This is my father, Ptah." And Ptah immediately starts speaking to Billy. And Billy's kind of surprised right away that he knows German. And Ptah says, "Very nice to meet you." Just the usual cordialities are exchanged between them. And Billy notices right away that he speaks great German. And he says, "No, I don't at all. I'm just wearing this little translator device here that takes my thoughts and converts it to whatever language that I want it to, any language that we have on our program bank." And Ptah asked Billy if he speaks any other languages, because Ptah doesn't speak German, but he speaks Greek and a few others, and wants to know if Billy can speak Greek, because he'd like to turn the thing off and they could practice. And Billy says, "Well, I speak a little Greek, but not very well." And he says, "Well, that's okay." So he shuts off the little translator box that he's wearing, and Ptah begins to speak this old Greek. Well, Billy is a little surprised that he can actually kind of understand it, and they give him a little device to wear also, so that when he thinks in his own language of German, it comes out in perfect Greek. So they're exchanging things in Greek. Ptah is speaking Greek himself. Billy's thinking German, and it comes out Greek, so Ptah can understand it. So this was how they were conversing. Ptah mentions to him that his name is a little unusual, and asks if Billy understands the historical reference to the name Ptah back on Earth history, that it was used by some Egyptian, he says, leaders. He says he has an old ancestor named Ptah that was used that name, but Billy wasn't familiar with it, and says perhaps he would look that up when he got a chance. Well, they discuss a few things about the ship, and Ptah explains more about what's going on, invites him to sit down, and explains to him that they have a certain mission that they're on, that they're going to be making different stops in different places today where they're going, and he invites Billy to sit down. There's a couple of kind of chairs there in this big horseshoe area, and Billy's looking at all of the equipment, And suddenly he looks up, he's looking at the top, at the ceiling, actually at the stars, because you can see right through the ceiling, and notices suddenly that the stars seem to almost blur for a second, like they're streaked, and then they straighten right back up again. And he says, what happened there? And Ptah explains that, well, they've just made what we would think of as like a jump in space, that they have just gone from the area they were at in the earthly space, that they just made a jump through hyperspace into the Pleiades now. And that's all it took. There was just a little secondary kind of blurring of the stars. And Ptah is beginning to explain to him a little bit how that worked. He also reminds Billy that they've managed to stop about 153 million kilometers away. They're farther than that, but that's as close as they can get to the end planets. Because again, these great spacers, like some of their smaller ships, when they make these jumps into hyperspace, then it has an effect on the orbit of the planet. So they had to make sure that they were quite a ways away. Well, as Ptah is explaining to Billy a little bit how this works, he's reminding him that, as it was explained to him earlier, that the universe is made up of coarse matter and fine matter. Coarse matter being the solid, real matter part of the universe, and fine matter are the many different energy levels that also exist in the universe. And that he was giving him a brief rundown again of how it works, that when you make the jumps through hyperspace, first there's this great speed which is obtained, and they use the great speed, of course, to increase the mass-speed correlation, so there's this tremendous pressure in on the ship that's held back by the screens. And then what they do is they drop the screens, increase the velocity, and break into hyperspace. And once they do that, they can create these time dilations, where they can actually, the ship then is in a fine matter world, and it is no longer solid. They can then project or program the ship somehow to go where it needs to go, and then it comes back into the coarse matter world, wherever it is that they want to be, and it's instantaneous. Time is paralyzed there for a second, so no time is really going by. All that you really notice, he says, is sometimes in the body you can feel the feeling of the body coming back together, because just for a part second it was no longer physical when they've broken into hyperspace and moved into this fine matter world. So Billy's real intrigued about that. And as he's sitting there talking to Ptah, during their course of conversation about a variety of things, which was mostly about Billy's mission and how he was doing and how it was affecting him, they made another jump, and again, Billy felt some unusual sensation. And Ptah was picking up on that in his thoughts, and he says, I'm noticing that you're picking up on something here, that you're sensing just a little bit of what it's like to be in the fine matter world. And Billy says, yeah, I'm something I never really experienced before quite like this, that each time we make a jump and break into this fine matter world, or null time, whatever you want to call it, that there's a very short sensation or connection to that somehow that feels kind of pleasant. And Ptah remarks that yes, that what you're doing is that remember that you are body and spirit, that when the body is no longer physical, that the spirit then has the ability to feel the sensation at being close to eternity or creation, whatever you want to call it, and that just for a part second there, you know that you are a total spiritual being and you're no longer in the physical body. And he was very surprised that Billy could actually sense that, because he says most people in the Pleiades, they have to be experience this several times and have it explained to them before they really pick up on what it is. And he could tell from Billy's thoughts that Billy was already figuring out what was going on spiritually, that his spirit was somehow touching eternity and sensing the great creational energy of the creation itself. And Ptah thought that was rather amazing that he could actually do that. And then he continued to explain to Billy that he really shouldn't be surprised that he could do that, because he actually was quite aware of Billy's high evolvement. And again, evolvement refers to a number of lifetimes and wisdom learned in those lifetimes. So it's not like Billy is better or less than anyone. He's older. He's lived more lifetimes, and contained within his spirit is the wisdom of things learned in those lifetimes, and that's what spiritual evolvement is. Again, that is the reason for our material life. to gather information with our senses and feed the truth from the result of that logic to your spirit. Your spirit's always open for business, paying attention to what you're doing all the time. So you might want to start considering as you're going through life and you're doing all these things in the material world that there's an attempt always to obtain spiritual growth. That your spirit is inside always paying attention to what you're doing. So be careful what you try to feed it. There was a short conversation about how the ship can actually move in time now, that because of the technology given to them by Ascot's people, the Timmers, that this great spacer not only could make these great jumps, it could paralyze time, but they finally had learned to understand a little bit about how to make a time shift. And he began to explain to Billy a little bit how what happens is when you make the jump from hyperspace and create these time dilations, that it's very important that when you're in the fine matter world, that the particles of the ship do not change their velocity. If the speed of the particles is changed, in particular slowed down, if it varies, well then there's a change. When you come back into the physical world, you will have slipped millions, maybe even billions of years in time. It's that sensitive. And he was starting to explain that a little bit. And Billy was getting just a little lost, and he was curious how fast they were going at the moment. And Ptah showed him some dials or something there on the equipment and how they were working, and Billy was able to figure out the speed that they were going at and relate it to kind of like, and I translated it to miles per hour. It came out to 280,000 kilometers per hour was the speed at the moment that the ship was traveling in free space. So they've made the jump to the Pleiades, and Billy's getting a little excited, and somehow Semjase senses in his thoughts that he would like to take a picture of all this. And she just says, yes, you can take a picture if you'd like to. I'll have one of the droids get your camera equipment out of the ship. He apparently had left it there. And Billy didn't even notice that she picked that out of his thoughts. He hadn't even asked the question. So Semjase already had sent a droid of some type to get the camera equipment, and it was back real quickly, and Billy had his camera equipment. And about that time, Ptah mentioned to him, he says, well, we're going to make another jump in about 9 seconds to the area that you call the Orion Nebula, and we will be approximately 1,800 light years from Earth. Well, Billy gets his camera ready because he wants to try to record on film what happens and what you actually see in space when they make this jump to hyperspace. But it's way too fast, and the light's not strong enough, and his pictures never came out in this, because apparently all you see is everything looks the same. Then there's a very kind of a momentary blur where all reality right around you seems to blur just for a part second, and then it's over. And that's all you don't experience anything. Well, they apparently had several things they needed to do to that day. They made 2 or 3 different jumps to different areas. And during the course of time, they continued to explain to Billy a little bit technically more about how the ship was operating. Each time they made a jump, Billy was becoming more sensitive. He was trying very hard to pick up on this feeling that he was getting when they made the jump, this small microsecond there where he's in touch a little bit with eternity. And he's getting more and more intrigued by it, and in his mind, he's, trying to figure out how it works. And Ptah senses that he has a lot of interest in this, and explains to him that, well, in the normal hyperspace jump, that it's no problem for them to paralyze time. That actually when you watch your watch, no time really transpires. It's just almost instantaneous. But because that they are actually leaving the coarse material world that we live in, the matter world, and that the ship actually is entering the fine matter world. It's no longer physical. It's just fine matter like thought then. Since it is actually converted to that, it does exist in a different state there for a very brief time. And he explains to Billy that they can stay on purpose in the fine matter world for a period of time if they're very careful about how they control the speed of their particles when they are in the fine matter world. And again, he explained to them if they don't control the speed just exactly right, if they slow down a little too much or drop the speed, that they would find themselves in endless, timeless loss. They would never find their way back home. They would be, apparently they would get so far out of time, wherever they would be, that it would be impossible for them to even find their way back. So they had to be very careful, but he says they had learned to control it where they could control the speed, the velocity of the particles just a little bit, so they could actually stay in the fine matter world for 7 minutes. And he says, here's what would happen. He says, if you are interested in that, we can do that we're going to be making a jump to what they call the barrier. There is a barrier built, a man-made barrier built by the Timmers, Ascot people, at a certain place in the universe that connects the two universes together. And they're going to be going to that today. And that apparently, on that particular jump, he says, if you would like, we've done it many times, and we can cause the ship then to stay in the fine matter world for 7 minutes. We can do this by controlling the velocity of the particles very, very little. And he remarks that in the fine matter world there actually is time, not like we have time here, but it's on a whole different scale, that just one little millionth of a second is equal to millions of years in the physical world. So to be outside in the fine matter world, and to change the velocity just for a part second, they would slip just a little bit. They would remain in the fine matter world for 7 minutes then, because of that very slight dip in velocity just for a part second. They would stay there for 7 minutes, and 35 minutes would actually go by in the known physical world. Now let me explain that one more time. In the normal world, here's how it would work. Let's say there are two of us, and we synchronize our watches, and we're on planet A, which is Earth, and let's say we're going to go to planet B, which is Era in the Pleiades. And we're in our ship, so we synchronize our watches. Okay, the ship takes off, and we start our watches here. We're watching our watch, and we're getting ready to make this jump over into the Pleiades. And normally when this is done, they paralyze time and space so that there is no time loss at all. But on this particular occasion, they're going to, on purpose, control the velocity of the particles in hyperspace so that they stay in hyperspace for 7 minutes, and there will be 35 minutes elapse on our watches. So here's what happens. The experiment starts. The ship then initiates the hyperspace, the jump into hyperspace, and we hit the button on our watches. Time is running now, okay? The ship goes into hyperspace, creates the time dilation. The programming is set in motion then for the ship is no longer solid. It is in the fine matter energy world. It is now in an energy state, and we have pre-programmed those particles while we were in the physical state, so that once we enter into this fine matter, there's a very, very slight retarding of the speed of the particles just for a part second. And I don't know how long that is. They said it's just a millionth part second. So it's a very fast thing, because you can't retard the speed very long or we slip way off into time and we'll be totally lost. So the ship does that. The particles are programmed. We go into the fine matter world. We retard the speed just for that part second. We now, in the fine matter world, 7 minutes, we will actually experience being in fine matter, in a non-physical form. 7 minutes will go by while we're in the fine matter world, and we will have awareness of that your spirit will be aware that it's in the fine matter world for 7 minutes. At the end of that 7 minutes, the ship and everybody in it then is converted back into the physical world. Only 7 minutes has gone by on our watches for those of us who are on the spirit side. We were there for 7 minutes. But we look at our watch, on the people on the planet, 35 minutes went by. That equates to 1 second in the timeless is equal to 5 seconds in the physical world. That's the general ratio. So 35 minutes went by, but we only lived 7 minutes. So in effect, 28 minutes, we're now younger. The people in the material world lived for 35 minutes, but we were gone during that 35 minutes, and we only lived for 7 minutes. So there might even be the beginning of a technology or somewhere where we could do with the cells of our body somehow, where the process could actually be reversed, where We could run all of our cells through the fine matter world or something and retard the life span. I don't know. But that's how they do it. And they had learned technically to get to that particular point where they could control the speed of the particles in the fine matter world. Well, Billy says his mind was boggled and he couldn't begin to understand how all that is possible. But if they were willing to retard and do this and allow him 7 minutes in eternity, he was very excited. He says, well, how would it be possible? Is everybody here going to experience that? And he says, no. All of us on the ship will feel it. Everybody on board the Great Spacer will sense that they are in the fine matter world. And Semjase remarks, one of the drawbacks here, Billy, is that because we're in the fine matter state, it's not possible for our physical minds at that point to record your thoughts while you're in the fine matter state, which is what they normally did. So when Billy got home, they could play all of it back. They have devices that record all of your thinking, so when Billy would get home, he could play it all back and then write it down so we could read it. But that wasn't going to be possible while he's in eternity. I see here we're coming to the end of the tape, so go ahead and advance it, and I'll meet you on the other side. We are on the next side, and when we left Billy on there, he was on board the Great Spacer, and he just was getting ready to experience eternity. And where Ptah had explained to him that they had the ability to cause the Great Spacer, when it's in timelessness, when it's in that null time fine matter world, they had the ability to retard the velocity of the particles just minutely enough to allow the ship to spend 7 minutes in the fine matter world. And again, now the universe is comprised of coarse matter, which is all the solid matter, and it's also comprised of fine matter, which is the energy, non-solid parts of the universe. So the ship is going to enter this fine matter world, which is sometimes described as a hyperspace mode, a null time, whatever you care to call it. But it's in this non-physical state that they are able to make these long jumps. And Ptah has just explained to Billy how it's possible that they can control the duration that they are in the fine matter world so he can experience eternity himself. Apparently this is something that most of the people on the Pleiades at one time or another have done, and it gives them the ability to actually experience a little bit of what the creational energy is really like. So Billy's got a little bit of time here alone with Semjase before that they're going to do that. And she's explaining to him how they have these apparatus which allow them to actually record his thinking while he's in the fine matter world, because they wouldn't be able to do it normally. Billy, out of the clear blue, says, Semjase, while we're waiting, could you write something for me for the people back home? And she says, what do you mean write? What's that for? And he says, well, I'm always having a lot of contacts. I'm always talking about you and explaining things to people. But they don't feel very close to you at all because they never get to see you or whatever. And it'd be nice for you to do something kind of personal so they'd feel a little closer to you. And if you were to write something, just a short message, hello, or draw a picture or most anything, that'd make them feel real good, kind of, closer, more of a friendship thing. And she says, I understand, but because I have no idea what to write. And he says, well, maybe you could write something like in your own language, and that would be kind of interesting. He says, by the way, what does your alphabet look like? So she draws the alphabet. She begins to write in the symbols that they use, and he recognizes right away that, well, many of those characters that you're drawing, symbols and so forth, look very similar to some of the old writings and things that exist on Earth. How is that possible? And she explains that, well, it was only about 11,000 years ago that our ancestors still lived there in the great continent of Atlantis, where they used the same language. And at the time of the Great Destruction, when they blew up Atlantis and Mu, there were still many of our ancestors living on the planet that understood this language. For instance, the Sumerians in the old India area. And that language has just kind of filtered its way down. Many of the 3 Indian tribes that still existed, remember there were 3 races of humans that were pulled together that existed after that, they were familiar with some of these symbols and some of these writings. So some of it is filtered down, some of the words and so forth are similar. So The Pleiadians themselves today still use the ancient Lyrian language, and some of it has worked its way into our society, and some of the words, like the word Salome, is not so much different than the word shalom. Salome in their language is spelled S-A-A-L-O-M-E. It means peace in wisdom. So there are many characters, words, and so forth from their old language which have found their way into our earthly cultures of different types. So Semjase writes a little message out for Billy to take home, and Billy goes through her alphabet and jots down all the characters of their alphabet, and then makes some notes about the pronunciation and so forth. So we have the Pleiadian alphabet. As a matter of fact, I'm just deciding now as I speak, I'll put that in the little diagram book that I'm going to draw for you. So there'll be a sheet in there showing the Pleiadian alphabet, and it'll also show the symbols of the Pleiadian world and so forth, and a few of their words and how they speak and so forth. So I'll put that in there for you. About this time, as Billy's waiting, he says, well, you know, I guess it's now's as good a time as any since I have a little time here. I'm ready to meet this this God, this Pleiadian God that was listening to my thoughts earlier. And the Semjase begins to chuckle a little bit, and he says, well, what's so funny? And she says, well, you've already met him. That was my father, Ptah. Well, Billy suddenly becomes really embarrassed in his thoughts, and he's kind of stumbling over himself. Oh my, what a fool I've been. All this time I thought that the great God may be a big pretentious so-and-so, and your father's so nice, and he's so pleasant, and you treat him just like anyone else. And she said, yes, even on our world, unlike yours, where people are all treated the same. Men and women are treated the same, and even those people who have become Ishwishes, kings of wisdoms, or gods to your people, she says, even these people, we still revere them on a very personal, we think of them on a very personal basis, that they're no better or less than the rest of us. They just benefit from greater lifetimes. And again, a reminder here that your spirit accumulates wisdom from lifetime to lifetime, and after a period of time, you gain in this wisdom. That's what spiritual growth is. So an Ishwish is the person who's lived more lifetimes, who through those many lifetimes, and through the physical senses, has gathered information, experiences, carried that wisdom forward in their spirit, and slowly, after numerous lifetimes, has gained the knowledge and experience of the physical world. At a certain point, these people have all the knowledges of nature and understand the elemental world and what's going on, and then they become a king of wisdom. A king of wisdom, again, is an Ishwish, which means God, or king of wisdom. And this is a person who has gained the knowledge and is still in the physical realm. He's still a physical person. Looks just like anyone else, but his mind is so spiritually developed that he has these knowledges. So that's what Ptah is. There apparently are many Ishwishes in the Pleiadian world, but they still seem to be very casual. There's no worshiping involved and so forth. So Billy was rather taken back this, but he was glad to see that it turned out that the Pleiadian God was still just a good guy you could sit down and have a conversation with. Well, it was time to get on with the jump. Billy's about to experience eternity, so he's getting a little excited, and he says, well, how's this going to work? How is it possible that myself and you and everybody else in the ship are going to go into the fine matter world, and how am I going to be able to experience this and remember it later on? She says, well, here's how we'll do it. We have a device, and she takes him into a special area, and she says, you'll sit in this chair, and he says, kind of an unusual looking chair, and he sits down in this seat, and she says, we have a device that will record your thoughts, that we can program this thing, so it will sense your thoughts while you're in the fine matter world, and we'll be able then to recall them later on. I have no idea how this works. It's a helmet of some sort that's lowered down over Billy's head. Billy notes that it doesn't touch the head, it would just lower down over it. And it's a physical thing. It's a device of some type that's going to record the thoughts that you're thinking. Well, the unusual part is that the ship is going into this fine matter world, and it's a physical object. I really have no idea how it's capable then of recording thoughts, because it also would no longer be physical and non-operative, I would think. So they have some pretty advanced technology then if they're able to do that, that somehow even the particles of the computers and this equipment can be programmed so they can be operable when they're in the fine matter world to record his thoughts, because that's exactly what's going to happen. Well, we're getting close to the time for the jump to come, and Billy is sitting in the seat, and the device is lowered down over his head, and he's preparing his thoughts and trying to get ready for what's going to happen next. So he's sitting there, and he notices it's just about getting ready to happen, and he sees the Semjas's backing up, and suddenly he looks up and sees that the stars are beginning to change again. That here comes the the jump just like it happened before, and he sees everybody kind of freeze and go into this milky thing, and there's a kind of a little streaking action, really blurred, and then suddenly all this goes black. There's no more stars, there's nothing, there's no coloring at all. They're in the fine matter world now, and it's just this plain, dark, black area. And at the moment, there's no sensations whatever. Suddenly, the darkness gives way to kind of a golden color. All around him becomes gold, and then slowly moves off into kind of a silver color. Everything is changing, and it gets brighter and brighter and brighter. The light becomes kind of a glistening, like a sparkling sort of thing, and gets super bright. And Billy notes that it's brighter than looking at a sun, but yet it doesn't hurt your eyes. Well, of course it wouldn't. At this point, you don't have any eyes. You're in a non-physical existence. The ship has just made its jump into hyperspace. There's a time dilation, it's called. All of your particles, all of the physical existence then, are now in a fine matter state. They're only existing as energy. Matter has been converted to energy, and it is now programmed for 7 minutes to be in this timeless situation. Well, in Billy's notes, there's about 5 pages here describing his thoughts of all the things that went through his mind while he's in this 7 minutes of eternity. So, not having it experienced myself, I can't tell you exactly what it's like. He said words even escaped him also, but I'll try to do the best I can explaining what the 7 minutes were like in this eternity. After he's immediately overcome with kind of the sensation of the light, he's still aware of himself. He's still aware of his personality, his own identity, and he's still thinking like in his normal mind. He has that awareness. But one of the first things that really happens is his feeling is changing. And he starts using a word like magnificent, magnificent. Man, oh man, this eternity, it's magnificent. What a feeling. And he's going on and on here a little bit about how his feelings are starting to change. There's this wonderful feeling of comfort, of love overcoming him. Gone and dissipating are any feelings and stress, the remembrances, the thoughts of the physical life. Several times throughout this, he will start to remember what it was like in the physical life. Oh man, he says, oh, the physical life, so much pain and strife, and it's hard work and difficulties of putting up with the material physical world. How different this is. How wonderful this is over here in the fine matter world. Because what's happening? We go through life perceiving everything with our physical senses, don't we? Sight, feel, touch, smell, hearing, so forth. And we perceive everything with those senses, and then we make decisions and judgments and values and everything based off of our physical thing. But we're not used to perceiving things with our spiritual self. And this is what's beginning to happen to Billy. Initially, I should say, when he first gets into this fine matter world, he's not used to experiencing things with the non-physical, so there's still the feeling of self. And then slowly, after a little bit of time here, he begins to start sensing things around him with his spirit. He's disconnected now from his physical senses. Sight, feel, touch, and smell, they're gone. So you no longer perceive information with those senses. You begin to perceive the information with your spiritual self. Very much like you would do in a very deep, deep meditation. But here, there are no physical senses, so it's like instantly into the deepest form of meditation that you could probably get. And a few really wonderful things start to happen. First of all, he begins to feel his spirit. He can understand his spiritual self without bearing the weight of any physical existence. This is probably something like what happens to us now when we slip off when we die, when we leave the physical body. Suddenly there's this dissipation of the physical awareness. And he's becoming aware of his spiritual self. And he's sensing his surroundings. And he starts to feel the presence of other beings. He feels the presence just mildly. He almost hears someone calling out to him, but he can't quite grasp it. But he knows that there are other energies around him. He's probably experiencing the other people that are on the ship that are going through the same thing. So this feeling continues to grow into him. And now after a minute or so, all the feelings of the physical are left behind. And he's left in there in this glistening light, becoming aware of the fact that he's slowly becoming in touch with eternity. And he starts to see this clearer and clearer. What's happening here? He's getting in touch and he's sensing the creational energy. And here we're using creational energy and eternity to mean the same thing. He's becoming aware of this energy. Normally we're not aware of this. We're so busy perceiving everything with our physical senses that we don't really have any living physical proof that there is a God force or creational energy, whatever you want to call it, really out there. But now Billy is slowly becoming aware that it does exist, and here it is. His feelings slowly start growing into the fact that he realizes that he's no longer alone. He is not just one individual. In our physical world, we're like that. We think of all of ourself first. Me, I, because we're always aware just of self, and we go out and perceive other people and other things with our senses. Here something new is happening. Here he's in a spiritual form, and he's sensing the other spirit forms around him, and suddenly he's feeling the connection to other spirit forms. He's beginning to feel like that connection between all spirit forms, where everybody's connected together, sharing. There's a connection between all the people, and there's something greater even in here. There's even something better than just the connection to the other spirit forms. They are all, and he also is connected to the creational energy. And for the first time, he's beginning to feel very strongly that it is really there. There's this overwhelming feeling of love and calm and warmth and just generally feeling good. There are no more feelings brought on from the physical world of depression, of anger, of anything. Any tensions are left behind from the physical world, and you're left alone in this blissful state where the creational energy that's out there, which is perfection itself, is beginning to move in and make its impression on his spirit, and he and everyone on the ship is feeling it. Imagine, if you can, the ability to shut off your physical existence and just for a moment to feel the complete love and perfection of the spiritual energy of the universe. Billy's starting to move into this. He suddenly becomes aware that death is no big deal at all, that it is no great terror or horror. It's simply a conversion from the material form into the fine matter form. And actually it's a really wonderful, blissful state. That over here in this fine matter world, there is existence. And most importantly, there is awareness and there is connection with other spirits and the creational energy of the universe. So he's becoming more and more fulfilled with this. As he's doing this, the things that he's learned about spirituality, about adding things to your spirit and this accumulated wisdom, become more and more clear to him, because he can begin to feel other spirits all of different levels. He can sense people, their spirits, that they are different levels of evolution. And he can feel clearly now that everyone in here, there are millions of spirits, uncountable spirits, all connected to creation, and that everyone has their own path. Everyone's on their own level of evolution. You see, again, the reason for the physical life is to gather information with your senses. You create logic, you have experiences, and when you've had experience and it becomes part of yourself physically, the wisdom from that experience is passed on to your spirit. That information moves on from lifetime to lifetime. And as your spirit gathers in wisdom, that's what spiritual evolution is. So everyone is slightly at a different spot. We're all learning different things and experiencing things at different times. So it's a little different from all of us. We're all on our own paths of discovery and going different places. So the important thing is that Billy is sensing this very clearly. He can feel other spirits and sense that they're all different, that they're all experiencing different things. They have different feelings about them, but they're all connected to creation, and they all share that in common. What a wonderful thing it would be on our world, in our physical world, if we learn to calm down and use our spirit when we meet someone, to perceive them as a spiritual being instead of just what we experience with our physical. Normally, let's say a plant, for instance. Normally you just go right by a bush and you don't think anything of it because it's just something to walk by. Now maybe if you're really into flowers, you might stop, and notice what a pretty flower it is, or what kind it is, or how it was grown, or where it's grown. But let's think just for a second that suddenly, even with a flower, because it's part of creation also, it's just at a different level than us. Let's just for a second imagine that we could look at a flower, and anything in nature for that matter, and look at it as a spiritual energy, a spiritual being of its own. And just for a second perceive it that it also is just like us, a spiritual form moving through an evolution, and that it also is connected to creation. It's not just a material thing. Something really wonderful happens when you perceive anything in creation as a spiritual being on its own, and look at its wonderful self that it's doing, that it's creating its own life, and it's creating its own petals. It's having its own experience. It's not mad at you. It's not challenging you. It's not threatening you. These are things that we do with our physical senses. We learn in our difficult society to be prejudiced and hate and anger and these things, but all these things dissipate for the spiritual person. The person who can perceive anything in life as a spiritual entity, as a spiritual form first, hate, anger, and these things just vanish. They don't even ever come up. So Billy's in this fine matter world, experiencing the love of all of these spirits, and he's feeling more and more the connection to creation itself. And as the minutes go by, that feeling gets stronger and stronger, and he becomes clearer and more aware that the creation itself is the true perfection. What is happening here? Well, what really happened is that creation itself is a collection, it is an idea. I think you could describe the creation best as the creation is a spiritual energy that embodies the idea of perfect love, of perfect coming together of all the senses of all forms of creation. It is the creation that had the idea for the spiritual energy to begin the universe. And all these things that we know of, from all the solid matter, from different creatures, planets, and so forth, are all forms, spirit forms, created by the original idea of creation. So creation is a collection, then, of all forms of energy that have evolved up to their own perfection. Billy can start to sense in the fine matter world that there are entities who have gone beyond the physical, no longer need the material senses. Some of them have gone into what we think of as they've moved together and become collective consciousnesses together, where spirits then begin to come together in small groups of like sevens, and then they move on and come into larger groups. Then they totally lose awareness of the physical altogether. They are now contributing to the general welfare of the universe by creating thoughts and energy forms and so forth that help the universe itself actually work. Eventually, the human form will evolve into being part of the creational energy itself, and goes on as the universe is going through its cycles to help with the actual creation of the next one. So the creational energy, and this is where the concept of we are all gods or are sharing in God comes from, that it is true that we are all part of the creational energy, and that the creational spirit itself is just other energy forms before us who have, you might say, graduated through all these levels of accumulating wisdom. They have evolved to the point where they have, through wisdom, earned the right to be part of the creational force of the universe. And that's what we are all doing. We're just very young on the scale. So Billy gets more and more excited, and he is affirming and confirming all the things that he's been learning over the years about spirit, and it becomes very, very clear to him what life is really all about. Imagine having an experiencing like that. So in a Pleiadian world, most all of them have been able to experience that for themselves. It's not to the point where you just have to like stumble around and try to figure out what life is all about. Here you've had a full dose of it. Here you have clear understanding that life is physical and non-physical, that the universe is solid and its energy, coarse matter and fine matter. Here is proof that there is a creational force. Here is proof that there's a creational force that we are all connected to, that we are all sharing in, and we are all growing on our own paths. And here's proof that we are a spiritual being that is moving through a series of material lives to grow on our own. So what a wonderful experience he had. He got deeper and deeper into this where he was just at a loss for words. He's just rambling on about magnificent, wonderful feeling, the love of it all. And finally it's getting to the point where he's starting to sense the creational energy itself more and more. He is so overcome with the loving, caring feeling that he's getting from it. He is just lost. He's so caught up in this. Well, unfortunately, it's about right here that he suddenly senses that it's over, that he's pulling back into the physical. The ship has re-entered out of the timelessness, out of the fine matter world, and is coming back into the physical, and he doesn't want to. He's trying to stay there. He's fighting it very hard, and he's saying, no, I don't want to come back. I don't want to go back into the material world. It's wonderful here. Oh, surely the earthman must know how wonderful this is on this side. Everyone must learn, what it's like to be a spiritual self. And how could anyone ever, think a mean thought, and, if they know about the spiritual side? And he's going on and on like this, and suddenly he feels Sannyasi is shaking him. And he kind of snaps to, and she's grinning, and she can tell what's going through his mind. And he just does not want to leave this state of mind and come back into the physical. And she comments to him, well, I understand, I know, we've all experienced the same thing, and this is your first time. And he's just babbling. He's going on and on about how wonderful it is. And she helps him out of the chair, and I can almost imagine what state you might be in at that point, having had an experience like that. You can even begin to see now a little bit why Billy's the way that he is. There are a lot of stories about Billy being a hermit and keeping to himself and not wanting to really see other people and talk about his life much anymore. And maybe now you can start to understand why. Billy is a very a unique person, both by his experiences and his thoughts, in that the things that he's experienced in his life make him quite different than the rest of us. It's very difficult to have lived and experienced and gained the knowledges that he has and come back into our 9-to-5 world of credit cards, freeways, cars, jobs, and things like that. So Billy keeps himself in an environment that's conducive to his thoughts. He's trying very hard to hang on to the feeling and the wonderment of all the things that he's experienced, and keeps himself in an environment like that. This is the reason that he and the people around him, which are learning from him, they try to protect their environment. They're not being cold or rude to other people. On the one hand, they're trying to protect their lifestyle so that they can also learn and gain experience from this and try to interface with the real world that's always knocking at their door. And that's not a real easy task to do. Okay, well, Billy's out of this, and Sannyasi says, we have a few other things to do. And he says, now what's going on? And he's just kind of shaken up. And Ptah comes over to talk to him, and they get into a conversation. And Billy's commenting on the great experience that he's just had, because, being a physical person, a normal human like the rest of us, he keeps forgetting all the time how telepathic they are. And they already know everything he's just experienced. They probably, tried to listen in or whatever they could afterwards, or if that was possible, to what happened to him. But Ptah is already sensing in Billy's mind the experience that he had, and he's just kind of nodding his head, and yes, I understand. And Billy's going on and on about how wonderful it was, how great it was, and they have to slow him down and calm him down a little bit. And Ptah calms him down, and they sit down and they have a lovely conversation for about, half an hour or so, which is in his notes. And it's basically all centered around reminding Billy the importance of his mission, how special he is, and Ptah's explaining to him how important it is that he understands that even though they seem to heap praise on him from time to time about how capable he is, they're trying to make him really understand and become aware of how special he is. That he was born into a physical family of a normal farmer's family in Switzerland, but he had a very special lifetime ahead of him. That he is a prophet of our times. He's not greater or better than any of the rest of us. A prophet is a person who helps us. A prophet is a person who helps us. who's inspiring, who's a visionary, who leads us down a path of self-discovery by nature of the things that they can tell us. And this is what Billy is. Billy was the chosen one to have all these experiences with the Pleiadians and experience things because he's capable of it, because of the age of his spirit. And so he passes it on to us. So that's what he is as a prophet. And Ptah is making this clear to him that, he's not to think of this as a big-headed thing. It is his job, it's his mission, it's his role, and to look at it and take it seriously. So they have a lengthy conversation about that. And somewhere in here, Ptah motions to him and says, you'll notice out here in space now where we're at, and Billy looks up and it's all very black, and he doesn't see anything except one little star off there. And Ptah says, well, we're coming to a very special area now in space, and that little star over there called Galtos, I think was the name of it, he says that's the farthest, most remote sun in the universe. It's at a very special place. And Billy says, the edge of the universe. And Ptah says, no, as we've told you before, there is no edge to the universe. The universe doesn't have an edge, but this is a very remote area. And the reason we're here is that this is where the barrier between universes is. And we are going to go into another universe called the Tao universe. And Billy's thoughts kind of go snap, and he says, Tao universe, that's where my old friend Asket was from. And Semjase studying there, he says, Semjase, this Tao universe, Asket, that's what the surprise must be all about. I'm going to see Asket again, isn't it? And she smiles, and Billy's getting even more excited because he never dreamed that he would see Asket again. Asket was his teacher and mentor from age 16 to about age 24. And at the age of 16, he met this woman. We're going to hear a lot more about her in the next few tapes, but just to give you a little rough background, she is from a very highly evolved race of people called Timmers, and they live in the Tao universe. She came into our universe, met Billy, and became his teacher when he was young. Billy was only 16 when he first became exposed to her. When he first physically met her, he was quite overcome by her and very impressionable, of course, by a very highly evolved, nice-looking woman, and just like any of us would be. But he never expected to see her again, and he has great feelings for her. So he was also getting very excited that he was about to meet Asket again. So Semjase explains that they're coming to the barrier, and he looks up and he can see it. And it's this very large area. And he's just kind of going, wow, one thing after another. And look at this. And there's this huge man-made thing out here. It's like a big tunnel that is built that they're going to go through. And he says, well, do we have to make like a jump or something to do this? And she says, no. We're going to go right through this in physical form. It's about 1 million kilometers long, and I forget how wide it was, but it was very large. And they go right through it, almost before she can even finish explaining what it was all about. When they get through it, they're again in black space, and the Ptah mentions we are now in the Tao universe. Well, Billy looks up and he sees a little ship floating out in space, and he says, that must be the ship of Asket. And she says, you're right, we're going to meet up with Asket. Well, Billy's little heart is pounding again. He's all excited. What a day he's having. So he's excited again, and he's up on his feet. And Semjase says, well, come on, we're going to go have our meeting with Asket now. Let's go over to her ship. And she takes Billy by the hand, and they walk over to an area, and there's like a hole in the floor. And she tells Billy, just go ahead and step off into that space, and it's a lift, and it'll lower you down to where the ship is parked. And Billy's a little apprehensive because, who wants to step into a hole and just fall down into free space? But she assures him that it'll be okay. He goes ahead and he steps off into the space there. He doesn't fall. He just slowly starts being let down. He looks up and Semjase is right behind him. And it just takes a few seconds and they go thousands of meters and suddenly they're standing right down next to where the beam ship was parked way down below. Well, they get into Semjase's ship again and they pull out from the great spacer, and it's just a short distance over to where Asket's ship is parked. Asket's ship is much smaller than the spacer, and it just has room in it for one beam ship to park. They pull right into Asket's ship and park in, I guess you call it a hangar or something like that, in the ship. And Billy's getting quite excited just at the prospect of meeting Asket. My, what a bunch of great experiences he's having all in one day here. He's going to have emotional overloading here. So he gets out of the beam ship, and they're walking with Semjase, and he notices that everything's kind of metal looking, the hallways, it's kind of cold looking. And they go down the hallway, and this wall kind of opens up, and they go into this very nice looking, comfortable room with chairs and very comfortable furniture. And he looks across the room, and there's Aska. Now, Aska's a tall, blonde, very nice looking woman. There's a picture of her over at Billy's house. She's a very beautiful, nice looking woman. And he's just kind of overcome. He hasn't seen her in ages, and he was very impressed by her when he was young, when he had these meetings when he was 16. And it's been a long time now since he's seen her. I think he stopped seeing her in 64, I think it was, something were in there. And so we're up to like 75. So it's been 11 years since he's seen her, and he never really expected to see her again. One thing I need to tell you about Aska, her race, the Timbers, are far older even than the Pleiadians are. And they have total faculty of the mind. And by that I mean is they have recall of any thought or word that they've spoken throughout their life. An incredible concept, right? But they're using a very large percentage of their brain. Later on we'll find out that Aska was even able to recall to Billy word for word and thought by thought almost all of their experiences and help him go over his notes from his encounters with her years later. Well, one of the special things about Aska also is the fact that they have an interesting way of saying hello. We kind of shake hands and hi, how are you, and talk for a few minutes to establish an atmosphere between each other when we meet each other. Well, with Aska it's slightly different. When Billy first met Aska the first time, the physical contact years ago, he remarked that she has the ability, when they say hello, she takes and kind of pushes telepathically all of her feelings and love and concern for another human right into you. And Billy says every cell in your body tingles with the sensation and the feeling that she pushes into you. And he's never forgotten that, and it just happens to him again. She just rushes him mentally with her wonderful feelings of love that she has for all of humanity, and especially him. And his heart's just pounding 90 miles an hour. He can't even talk. He's trying to speak, and he's just like stuck. Nothing comes out of his mouth, and he's just stuck right there on the floor. So Aska walks over, sensing this, that Billy's a little overcome. He's just about to tears. And she takes him by the hand and pulls him close and gives him a really nice hug and a little kiss. And he's just kind of beside himself like a little puppy, I guess. And he says, a kiss, a kiss. And she says, well, of course, it's people on earth aren't the only ones that kiss. We can do that too. And he says, ask it. I never thought I would see you again. And she said, well, I wasn't sure that we ever would see again. When last I left you, this meeting was not projected. I didn't really expect to, so there was no way I could let you know that it was really going to happen in the future. And they're talking for a few minutes, and he's calming down, and he says, well, what is the purpose? Why are you here? How come we're meeting? And she says, well, it's twofold. Mostly I just wanted to see you, but we do have another mission. And I think Semjase had explained a little bit about Billy to it before, that Aska had explained that her people, the Timbers, who live in the Tao universe, some years back, about 9 years previously, they were experimenting with kind of a time projectile capsule that they could time project from their universe into ours. It doesn't fly, they somehow just cause it to time displace. And it would come from their universe and just appear right in onto Earth. Well, they had sent one of these projectiles as a test, and it had gotten lost. There had been a miscalculation somehow in the time projection, and the Earth was not where it was where they thought it was going to be when the capsule hit the planet, and so it got lost. And apparently the capsule was a little late, and the Earth had already rotated and moved, and they couldn't find it. It took, I think, Semjase about 3 years, she said, to find the capsule, and it was in India somewhere. And there was even an accompanying story and letter that Billy had heard from earlier. He says, oh, I've heard something about that. And he turns to Semjase and says, I received a letter from a couple of women who say they came across an extraterrestrial woman digging something out of the sand in India and said her name was Semjase. And I thought, well, that couldn't be. And then Semjase confirmed, yep, that was me. I did have those experiences. That's one of the reasons we're here, is to return the time capsule. we could have done it in other ways, but we wanted to tie this in also with your reunion with Ascot. So they came to retrieve the capsule, and Billy's just so excited, and Ascot says, "Excuse me just a moment, and I'd like you to meet Nera." And Nera, and it's spelled Nera, she's a dark brunette-looking woman, very nice-looking woman, and I'd like you to meet Nera. And Semjase says, "Ascot, is this your ship?" And she says, "No, this is not my ship. I'm acting here as the first commander. Excuse me, the captain of this ship is named Scholars, and unfortunately you won't be able to meet him, though. He was off doing something else." But she introduced Billy and Semjase to Nera as her deputy, second in command here. And she says, "Billy, if you'll speak with Nera just a few moments, and I need to go," she goes with Semjase to get the time projectile out of the beam ship. So Billy's left with Nera to talk, and he takes one look at Nera, and he immediately has these swelled up feelings in him again of, what a nice looking woman, how pretty she was. And Nera kind of giggles because she's feeling what Billy's thinking, and Billy, again, being an Earthman, forgets how telepathic they are, and he's a little embarrassed. But she calms him down and explains, "Well, it's very kind of you for an Earth person, that I've been on Earth many times, and I'm not used to Earthmen having those kinds of feelings of sincerity about women." A little slam towards us there. And Billy says, "Really, you've been on Earth?" And she says, "Yes, several times with Ascot in the past, and sometime in the future we will probably return again." And he says, "When is that?" He says, "Well, no time soon. It'll be long after you've passed away in your physical life. We may return again there in the future sometime." They also, like the Pleiadians, enjoy a much longer lifespan than we do. Well, Nera, they have a little chat about life on Earth and some of her experiences, and she explains to Billy, because of his question about why always women, that she says, well, the Pleiadians and their people had discovered a long time ago that on Earth it was much better to use women for contacts because we're much more open to it. That when they have a contact with a man, that the men always seem to feel a little threatened or whatever, and the contacts don't go as easily, that they have found that the Earth men get along much better with Earth women. And Billy comments, "Yeah, I know what you mean. I don't get along with other guys as well as I get along with other women." But I'm sure it has something to do there probably with the sexual attraction too. Semjase and Ascot are back with the time projectile. Billy asks if he can take a picture. He wants to get a picture of all three of them. And they decide they'll consent to that because Ascot and Nera won't be on Earth anymore, and they don't mind. And they comment that, well, Semjase can join us in the picture, but this must be for only your own private use, and you can't pass it around because Semjase still has work to do on Earth and doesn't want her picture around, anybody to know what she looks like. So Billy agrees, and he takes the picture of all three of them. I have not seen that picture. Unfortunately, though, it probably is part of the collection that got lost. Billy shot several rolls of film on this trip and only got about one of them back. The rest are disappeared somewhere in the mail or probably in private collections and in government drawers and so forth. And anyway, he snaps the picture with Semjase, Ascot, and Nera, and then he also takes a couple extra pictures of just Ascot and Nera, which we do have. They're a little blurry and they're slightly greenish gray, like most all of his pictures inside of ships. And his camera is jammed just a little short of f/16, so his pictures never come out remarkably clear when he's close. So they're just a little bit off. So the reunion is kind of solidified there with Ascot, and it's time now for them to leave. And Semjase remarks that, well, we still have some other things to do, and it's time for them to say goodbye. They have some other experiences for Billy to enjoy before they take him back to Earth. So Semjase and Billy leave the ship of Ascot and head back towards the Great Spacer. On the way, Billy's asking about this concept of parallel worlds. And Semjase explains that, yes, there is a parallel universe. That all the planets, suns, and everything, all the physical matter of the universe actually has a parallel form. That each planet has an exact parallel of itself. That there is a parallel to the planet Earth, where you would see the same people, buildings, and cities, so forth. The only difference is there's a slight difference in time. And Billy comments, gee, you'd like to take a picture of that. She says, well, it really wouldn't reveal very much because it looks exactly the same as the present world really does. She says it would be okay, but you really couldn't expect to get very much. They get back over to the Great Spacer and they park the ship again in pretty much the same place that they did before. And once again, they take the little floating craft, whatever you want to call it, this little floating platform, and they go back up to the top of the spacer where Ptah is. Ptah immediately senses how excited Billy is from all these experiences he's just had, and invites him to sit down and talk with him a little bit. He explains to him that what's going to happen next is they're going to go back through the barrier, back over into their own universe. And so Billy's looking up in the space, and he can see the big barrier up in front of him there. And Ptah remarks that they're going to go back through the barrier. When they get to the other end, that they're going to have some time. They have to wait when they get through the barrier on the other side, because they have to close the barrier. And when they close the barrier, he says it's automated. The ship is automatically programmed to do that, but it takes about 50 minutes for the actual closing of the barrier. Apparently this barrier, he also explained, was that there are only certain locations that it would be possible to build this barrier. And he didn't specify where those may be. Of course, we wouldn't have any idea what he's relating to anyway. But so they do get through the barrier and they stop. It takes a very short time to get through it, and they pull through. And Ptah mentions that they're going to be waiting out if Billy has any questions, that it could be a good time to ask. And Billy says, "Sure, I got lots of questions." And Semjase remarks, "When is there a time when he doesn't have questions?" So one of the first things that Billy wanted to kind of talk about was, he says, repeatedly throughout the contacts and even through his other contacts with other races, there's always been the subject all the time of religions, and he understands to some degree why religions can be difficult for people when they become, cult followers, so forth, of certain belief things, and it forces them not to be taking responsibility for themselves. But he also realizes that religion is also like a learning step that people can go through. So he's interested in Ptah's comments about religion. One of the main things that he did comment on says, yes, religions are a learning step, and it is something that everybody has to go through. One of the things they were concerned about, though, is that on Earth, unlike on other planets that go through belief structures and so forth, it had gone so far where religions had become so powerful. They had not seen this happen anyplace else in the universe. The term religion, as they referred to it, this organized Christianity, they had never seen it done quite to that extent. And he remarked that nowhere else in the universe had they seen that happen. His biggest problem with it was, he says, that Christianity had distorted the truth so much that it was interfering really with people's ability to learn. That people were coming into society because of the environment or family they may be born into. They are exposed to Christianity. They are taught Christianity. They believe that what Christianity is telling them, and it becomes like it's a hampering force. It keeps the individual from actually ever getting a chance to understand the truth. That it's not really so difficult to understand the truth about life and so forth, that it exists in nature around us all the time, that the observant person can come to understand more about life if he was just left alone. But in most cases, especially in the Christian world, that's not possible. Okay, I see I'm getting to the end of the tape, so I'll see you on the next side.